Hamadwa, Panyua Jerusalem, stand and face Jerusalem. Blessing of the Sabbath. Barakathe Yahweh, Basham Yahweh, Asherah, Nathanawa, Hashabath, Bashalawam, the water, Aman. Blessed are you, Yahweh, in the name of Yahweh Shai that gives to us the Sabbath and peace. Thank you, so be it. The Alima Asherai Makad, Psalms 121. Anya Rayam Mayan Harim Mayan Yabawa Zarya Yabawa Mayahawa Shashab Shemayam Warataza La Yanathan Lamawat Regalia Yala Yanawam Shashra Marka and La Yanawam. Wala Yashan Shashramar Yashville Yahweh Shamar Yahweh Tazalia Ayub Yim Yawamam Hashamash La Hakaya Wayarak La Balayala Yahweh Yashamaria Makab Rai Yashamar Napashya Yahweh Yashamar Habalakya Wabawaya my Tha wa Aid I Walam Basham Yahweh Shak the water man.
Psalm 121. I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord, which made heaven and earth. He will not suffer thy foot to be moved. He that keepeth thee will not slumber. Behold, he that keepeth Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is thy keeper, the Lord is thy shade upon thy right hand. The sun shall not smite thee by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord shall preserve thee from all evil, shall preserve thy soul. The Lord shall preserve thy going out and thy coming in from this time forth and forevermore.
Amen. Shemaiah Sharala, hero Israel. Shemaiah Sharala, Yahweh, Eloheinu, Yahweh, Echad. Shemaiah Sharala, Yahweh, Eloheinu, Yahweh, Echad. Shemaiah Sharala, Yahweh, Eloheinu, Yahweh, Echad.
6 and 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our power is one Lord.
Amen. Thapala Yahweh, the Lord's Prayer. Abinawa Shabbat Shemayim Kodash Hayya Shemke Yahweh Malakwavke Taba'a Ratazawanke Hayya Aisha Barataza Kabashemayim Natanlanawa Lakham Yawam Zad wasalak nawa kabawat nawa kasalak nawa kabawat yanawa wala abiyar nawa oh nasayawan above I was shine nawa murakaya lakab amalakwa wa ala wa thapara wa iwalam man.
Matthew 6 and 9. After this man, therefore pray ye, our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, and forgive our debtors. Lead us not into temptation, and deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever.
Amen. Ha'aisharam Tazawab, the Ten Commandments. La'ab, Yahayab, Lakab, Alahayam, Akarim, Alapanyat, La'ab, Thaishad, Lakab, Pasod, Wala'ab, Thaibadam, La'ab, Thalakwakaf, Shamwab, Yahawab, Alahayakab, Lashawab, Zakar, Eth, Hayawam, Ashabath, Laquadashwad, Kabad, Abiyaka, Wa Amaka, La'ab, Taratazak, La'ab, Tana'ab, La'ab, Taganab, La'ab, Thainad, Shakur, La'ab, Tachamad, Ko, Asherad, Lara'ika, Aman.
Exodus 20:3. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy power, am a jealous power, visiting the iniquity from the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy power in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that the keep his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy power. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is in thy gate. On the 6th day the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Honor thy father and thy mother, that the days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy father gave thee. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not covet, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his maidservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's. Amen.
Aman. Yeshabwa, be seated. Barakathe Hawa, ba Shemi Hawa Shai, Sharonathan Nawa Parya Gapin Thwada Aman. La Yawa ba Shemi Hawa Shai, Yashra. English translation. Blessed are you, Yahweh, in the name of Yahweh Shai that gives to us the fruit of the vine. Thank you, so be it. To Yahweh, in the name of Yahweh Shai, with Israel. At Magua, Panyaway Jerusalem, stand and face Jerusalem. Barakathe Hagado, Rakawam, Abiyar, Wanawa'e, Aliyawan, Malak, Shao, Shamayim, Warataza, Wako, Dabarium, Kayayam, Wagam, Mashayak, Mayahawa, Arawanawa, Ahabnawa, Apalat, Yawa Aitaza, Yahawasha, Zakarnawa, Yahawa, Bartazawan. Ainka Yash Allah Azarnawa Bana Wasap Yash Allah O Nanawa Yam Yan Aitha Kaya Wamyam Makwadam Babakusha Shalak Mike Allah Watazwadak Allahayam La Maganawa Raparnawa Washamar Elnawa Baikwa Shalak Haroka Shao Yao Shai Lanawa Lalamanawa Rabiam Kakamath Abawana Wada Aith Shao Da Barka Basham Yahawashai Thawada Thum Yad Waiwalam Aman. English translation. Blessed are you, Yahweh, the great, merciful, mighty, terrible, most high power, King of heaven and earth and all things living, and also the anointed from Yahweh, our Lord, our friend, the counselor, Yahweh Shai. Remember, Yahweh, favorably your people Israel. Help us build and gather Israel, Most High, we beg you, right now, like the days of old. Please send Michael and the righteous powers to protect us, heal us, and watch over us. Mainly send the spirit of Yahweh Shai to us to teach us much wisdom, knowledge, and understanding of thy word. In the name of Yahweh Shai, thank you, always and forever, so be it. Repeat the Hebrew only. Blessed are you, Yahweh, in the name of Yahweh Shai that gives to us the law. Barakatha Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, Asherat, Nathan Lanawa, HaTawarat. Blessed are you, Yahweh, in the name of Yahweh Shai that gives to us light to see. Barakatha Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, Asherat, Nathan Lanawa, Awar, Larawath. Blessed are you, Yahweh, in the name of Yahweh Shai that gives to us the ram's horn to call the people. Barakatha Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, Asherat, Nathan Lanawa, Quran, Hayo, La Korah, Ha'ain. Blessed are you, Yahweh, in the name of Yahweh Shai that gives to us the olive oil to anoint Israel. Barakatha Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, Asherat, Nathan Lanawa, Hasheman, Zayef, Lamashak, Yasha'ala, Yeshabwa. You see it. Okay, so Shalom Yasharala. So Shalom, everyone that's here in Philly. Shalom, everybody watching on live stream, and Shalom, everyone listening in on teleconference. Welcome to Ashrala Kanas, which just means the Congregation of Israel, where we teach that the descendants of slaves, as well as the indigenous peoples found mainly in North, Central, South America, and the Caribbean, make up the southern and northern kingdoms of the 12 tribes of Israel. And that we fall into a lower state politically, economically, even religiously, because we broke the laws of God found in the Bible given to us by Moses. They become out of this lower state that we fall into by turning back to these commandments we broke by following Jesus Christ, as it is written, not according to the customs of today, but as is written in the scriptures. One way we do that is by keeping the Sabbath holy as well as the other holy days. Today is special because not only is it a Sabbath, it's also a new moon as well, the second new moon in particular. So we're keeping both today, as we discussed this past night when we kept the new moon service. So while we keep it as a Sabbath, we also keep it at this particular Sabbath as a feast as well. So you can cook on this Sabbath because it's also a new moon. And as we go into our particular branch of Christ, we go into a regularly scheduled Sabbath service. Today's lesson is going to be 1 Maccabees 1 and 2. Once again, 1 Maccabees chapters 1 and chapter 2. And I got some visual aids that I'll bring up here to stream with you guys, and even some historical references that we'll make. since when we go into the Maccabees, it's a lot of good history here, just to show that the Bible is not just, you know, while it is a book of inspiration and wisdom, it's also a book of chronology and history, right? It's a book of record. So it can be used as a primary source, as do scholars, biblical scholars, as well as archaeologists and others fields of a similar profession. They'll use the Bible as a primary source. Not like most common folk today who claim to be spiritual, and they'll say, oh, well, I don't deal with that book because of reason X, Y, Z. We know the truth. Their problem is with religion, which pushes what? Half-truths and just outright lies, whereas the scriptures themselves tell oftentimes a different story. So once again, First Maccabees chapter 1 and chapter 2. My name is Nabiab Zerubbabel. I'll be doing a service today. All praise to the Most High in Christ by way of the Holy Spirit. It gives me the ability to do so. Just write down for your notes. According to the Gregorian calendar, today would be April the 30th, 2022. But according to our calendar, it would be the second month and the first day. Once again, the second month and the first day. So what we read today in Maccabees deals with what? The history of our people during the time of the Greek Empire, or when the Grecians took rule. This is when our brother Esau, his original name, first took rulership in the earth to be the dominant empire. It was during the times of the Greeks, and it was kicked off by a particular man of their nation named Alexander. So before we go to First Maccabees 1 and 1, what we'll do first is we'll go to a prophecy pertaining to this Alexander and the rise of the Greeks that was actually going back all the way to the time of Daniel, who lived a couple centuries before. But even he prophesied not only what would happen to the government that he was in, but also the governments that would come after, including this Greek Empire. And the Most High showed him visions. And in his visions, he was shown different things, different animals, right? They had different features. And those different animals represented the empires that would come after the Babylonians, right? Which was the empire he was initially under when him and others like him were taken into captivity. So let's go to Daniel chapter 8 first. Because as we go through Maccabees, we'll see it's history when the brothers who wrote Maccabees are writing it, but it's prophecy when Daniel wrote this. So for those who wrote Maccabees, it had already happened, whereas when Daniel talked about it, it was before it happened. So this is Daniel. I'm going to get chapter 8. I'm going to start from verse 5. Because he talks about the Persians and the Medes also, but I want to focus on the Greeks. So Daniel chapter 8, this is verse 5. It reads, and as I was considering, this is Daniel talking about his vision. Behold, an he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth and touched not the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. It says in verse 6, and he came to the ram that had two horns, which I had seen stand before the river, and ran at him in the fury of his power. So you had this goat that feet didn't touch the ground. It had a horn on his head that came from the west. And it says he hit this ram that had two horns with the fury of his power. says in verse 7, and I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler against him, and smote the ram and brake his two horns, and there was no power in the ram to stand before him. But he cast him down to the ground and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. So this ram with the two horns took a loss to this goat and said he couldn't get up after he banged him pretty hard. Then it says in verse 8, therefore the he-goat waxed very great when he was strong. The great horn was broken, for it came up four notable ones toward the four winds of heaven. That's very important too. So when this he-goat took out the ram with two horns, it says he waxed great, and it says he had a great horn, but it says when that great horn was broken, it says four notable ones stood up after him, and it says they went towards the four winds of heaven, right? The four winds of heaven is just talking about north, south, east, and west. So they spread out and took over different regions, going north, south, east, and west of what's in the middle, which is what we now know as Israel, right? Then it says in verse 9, this is going to come up too. Out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south, and toward the east, and toward the pleasant land, right? Which the pleasant land is alluding to Israel in the middle. It says, and it waxed great even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the hosts and all the stars to the ground, and stamped upon him. Yeah, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host. And by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the palace of his sanctuary was cast down. And then finally in 12, I'll stop at 12. And a host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression. And it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. Right? So that's the vision that he had. But as we jump down, he's going to give breakdowns as far as what this vision actually meant, what these things that he saw represented. So just to get to it, like I said, I want to make sure we cover everything here as far as the video, the short video I want to play, as well as some of the history I want to read. From verse 20 of the same chapter, it says, and this is the angel Gabriel, when you read above, giving the angel the vision to show Daniel, as well as to give him the breakdown. So it says, the ram, this is verse 20, the ram which thou sawest having two horns are the kings of Media and Persia. So that's what this ram was in this vision. Those two horns represent what? It was two people who ruled together, right? First, you kind of see the Persians take the lead, then you see the Medes take the lead. And we see this not only, you see this during Daniel's reign as well, because when Daniel was in power with the Babylonians, he was high up in the government there too. And then when they lost power, the Babylonians lost power to the Persians and Medes, he was with them too, up in their government. Think of it as like when a corporation buys out another one, right? Oftentimes they'll take the people of the old corporation that played a certain role, especially if it was an important role, and bring them into the new company, right? That's what you had here as far as these rulerships when it came to Daniel and others like him. So that's what this ram with the two horns is. But then in verse 21, it says, and the rough goat is the king of Grecia, right? So this represents the Greeks and their rulership. Then it says, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. This horn that was on this goat's head represented their first king. This is talking about their first king that united them all, which was this Alexander. As we're going to read in Maccabees, he was specifically from Macedonia, but he united all the different city-states of the Grecians and became the first king over all Greece. Then it says in 22, now that being broken, whereas four stood up for it, four kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. So a short little video that we'll look at, and a map we'll look at too, goes into this, right? As far as him having rulership, but then when he died, he had 4 generals, right, that were under him, and they all pretty much put crowns on themselves because it was unclear who would be the next ruler amongst his generals. And they all took out different parts. That's why it says the 4 winds. When we look at the map, we'll see those 4 winds or 4 directions. And you'll see his 4 generals go in those 4 directions to take over land towards those respective directions relative to Israel, which is right there in the middle. Then it says, let me read 22 again. Now that being broken, whereas 4 stood up for it, 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. And Maccabees is going to talk about this too, and it's confirmed in history. It says, and in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up, and by his power, rather in his power, shall be mighty, but not by his own power. He shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper in practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. Right? This is this little horn that I talked about back in verse 9, right? That says it's going to spread out towards the east, south, and the pleasant land. Maccabees is going to do a time jump and go into this particular ruler too that came out of this Grecian Empire, right? Out of one of those particular generals. It says, I'll read 24 again. And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. And he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper in practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people, talking about us. It says, and through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and shall magnify himself in his heart. That's very important too, because we're going to read in the history who this particular ruler was amongst the Greeks, and even the name he gave himself. And by peace shall destroy many. That's important too. You're going to see that continual theme as we go throughout the Maccabees, right? As far as the way that they conduct business, and the way that they deal with their enemies. It says, he shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without hand, right? That's also going to be revealed as well as you go throughout the Maccabees, as far as this particular ruler that came out of the many rulers that came out of the Grecian Empire, right? Because each of these 4 generals that came after this Alexander, they all had a succession of kings after them. We go in history. He's notable because of just how much he does, especially against us. And then the Most High, the way he takes him out is very unique. But we'll see the reason too as we go and read on the Maccabees. But I just want to cover that prophecy real quick, because when we read through Maccabees, we'll see these things being fulfilled, right? Which is why we trust in the Bible above all else, because man will tell us things from the past and even the current time, and they'll always be wrong about at least part of what they said, not everything. But when it comes to the Heavenly Father and what he told us and what he's given us through the prophets, this book here, he's never been wrong about anything. Everything that's in this Bible has come to pass, just the way the Most High said it. So Most High's got a better track record than others. So even as we watch some, visual aids, or look at some visual aids, and even read history, let's make sure we keep that in mind too, right? These are good, secondary, supplementary sources to provide us more detail behind the prophecy that we read. Always remember, when it comes to the prophecy of God and the Word, this is always our primary source. This is always the first thing we lean on. If anything we read outside of that supports what the scripture is saying, maybe add more detail to it, all right, fine, right? But anytime it says anything beyond what we can prove, we just have to leave it at that and just say, allegedly, or according to this research, or according to this archaeology, they found X, Y, Z. So it requires discipline to make sure we are mindful of that, because many brothers and sisters who have gone into the history, if they're not careful, right, the books of other men and women not inspired by the Holy Spirit can lead them astray. where then they, in their heart, start trusting in these other records more than they trust in the Bible. And that's where it becomes a problem. That's where a gift to go into history can then become a curse. So let's make sure we're careful with that. So this is First Maccabees now. Just wanted to read that little introduction in Daniel. So this is First Maccabees, chapter 1 and verse 1. And it reads, "And it happened after that, Alexander, the son of Philip, the Macedonian," that's what we were talking about earlier, right? That rough he-goat in Daniel, until he was a Macedonian, who came out of the land of Kittim. Remember, you'll see it spelled with a K sometimes, Kittim. You look at the old maps. Kittim is what we now refer to as Italy. But before Esau was there and being in Italy, it was actually ruled by dark nations that came out of Japheth, one of Noah's sons. Those were the original people to inhabit Italy. So it's called Kittim before. So when we read certain prophecies in the scriptures about places, the Bible oftentimes will refer to it by its original name and by its original inhabitants. So as long as you can trace it back and see where the original nations went, as far as the three sons of Noah, you can look at the location, and then based on the events of the prophecy, you can figure out, oh, okay, it's referring to a land that was originally inhabited by Japheth, but his prophecy is talking about something that happened later on. All right, so just asking the key questions and getting the answer, you can navigate that. It's not that hard. It says, "Had smitten Darius, king of the Persians and Medes, that he reigned in his stead the first over Greece." Right? So that was Daniel was talking about the thing with the two horns, the ram with the two horns. That was the Persians and the Medes. So it's going into who was over them, right? A particular Darius they took out. There was more than one Darius. It says in verse 2, "And made many wars and won many strongholds and slew the kings of the earth," right? It says, "and went through to the ends of the earth and took spoils of many nations, insomuch that the earth was quiet before him, whereupon he was exalted and his heart was lifted up." Right? So it's talking about what? He didn't just conquer Greece, but he conquered the Persians and Medes, but he went even further. He went even further eastward, right? He took out some of the nations that were in the east and expanded his empire really far, right? And notice what it says, the earth was quiet before him. So it's important to notice that word quiet, right? Because anytime someone takes rule, but they don't rule according to righteousness, you don't really have peace. The best you can achieve is quiet, which means what? Your empire, no matter how strong you are, it's on limited time, right? Now, how long that time is up to the Most High, ultimately to decide. But you can't really have peace unless you have what? Righteous rulership. But as we're going to see, they didn't rule righteously. It says, whereupon he was exalted and his heart was lifted up, right? So when you read about the he-goat traveling swiftly like his feet didn't touch the ground, it's going to how swiftly conquered, right? And, it's easy for one to get kind of beside themselves because, like we read in the prophecy, they did these things not by their own power, but in their heart of hearts, they're going to think that they're the ones doing it. That it's their own strength, their own might that allowed them to dominate. From Alexander even down to this little horn is going to come up later. Let's read on in this chapter. It says, "And he gathered a mighty strong host and ruled over countries and nations and kings who became tributaries unto him." So any nation, when they take power, they become the ruler, but then they require other nations to what? Pay them tribute, right? Like a tax of sorts to acknowledge their authority. We did that even when we established our rulership too. It says in verse 5, "And after these things he fell sick and perceived that he should die," right? And the visual aid I'm going to show you shortly is going to touch on this scene. It says, "Wherefore he called his servants, such as were honorable, and had been brought up with him from his youth, and parted his kingdom among them while he was yet alive. And it says, so Alexander reigned 12 years and then died. So he did a whole lot in that 12-year span, right? But it says that he parted his kingdom amongst those that he considered honorable, that were his servants. This going into those four generals. It says in verse 8, and his servants bear rule every one in his place. And after his death, they all put crowns upon themselves. So did their sons after them many years. Then it says, and evils were multiplied in the earth. See that? So that's what I was saying earlier. They didn't rule according to righteousness. They ruled their own way. And what they did was, as you're going to see in this video, but also as we read even in the history, because the scene from the movie I'm going to show you is just based on history. They adopted the cultures of the peoples that they conquered, from the Medes, the Persians, the Egyptians, and then incorporated them into their own beliefs, right? And oftentimes took the stories and just recasted the stories of the people that they conquered, and just put their faces on it. That's where you see the Greek gods. They have similar stories to the Medo-Persian gods and the Egyptian gods and goddesses. That's not by accident. And actually, process started before they even took the dominant power, but just furthered along after Alexander became the chief power on the earth. So I'm gonna do now is from you guys might remember this movie Alexander back in 2004. There's a couple scenes in there that there's a lot of scenes in there that are sometimes exaggeration, and even some scenes that you could say are not family friendly, right? That actually accurately depict Alexander and his lifestyle. Let's say it like that. I'm just going to show the last scene where it depicts what we just read here, as far as him being on his deathbed and him splitting up his rulership among his four generals. And then just say in the chat, we tested it out last week and it seemed like it worked pretty good where we could hear everything. We did like a local live stream to test it out. So just say in the chat if you guys can't hear the volume on the video. It's like a little over 4 minutes, but I'll just play this part and I'll just stop it as needed to kind of touch on things they touch on in this last scene. So let's share this here. Okay, and let's play this video. So as you can see here, make this big. Get it bigger? No. There. You see it says Babylon, Persia, 323 BC, right? So this is that year that he died, and we see he's far away from home, but which is Macedonia. But this was the year that he died, right? As far as what history records.
The 10th of June, a month short of his 33rd year, Alexander's great heart finally gave out. And as he vowed, he joined Hephaestion. But in his short life, he achieved, without doubt, the mythic glory of his ancestor, Achilles.
So go to how they like to look up to their Greek stories, right, that they believe in. This one being Achilles. He fashioned himself like this man Achilles, who was more myth than actual man, right? Similar to other Hamite nations and other Elamite nations. They'll do the same thing. They'll have certain myths and stories, and then the men who take rulership will fashion themselves like those same myths. All right, I'm going to continue.
And more. His sacrifice was an early death, but in keeping to his side of the bargain, I cannot help but feel he conquered death as well.
So you hear this, the author, the narrator is supposed to be an older version of one of his four generals named Ptolemy. He was the one that ruled over the Greeks. You see him talking about, I figured that he didn't really die. So they always had this desire to live forever. Similar to the Hamites and the Elamites that had rulership before them and the Medes. They always had these rituals that they would do, and they would think that they would grant them everlasting life, which we know only the law can allow a person to truly live. This is supposed to be his mother. This actress playing his mother here. I think that's Angelina Jolie. She's supposed to be playing his mom in the movie.
Olympius's transgression in the murder of his father is, to my mind, a probability. His, a burden. Alexander was too in love with glory for him to steal it. But by blood, and blood alone, he was guilty.
So that's like, you can't say that's actually historical or not, but she's supposedly dealt with like, curious arts. We'll just say that, like it says in Acts. So this eagle being bitten by a snake supposed to be representative of Alexander, who fashioned himself as an eagle, being taken out or dying, right, due to this sickness. So that's why she's screaming, because she saw this sign, and now it's been revealed to her, oh, wow, her son hasn't survived this illness.
Within hours, we were fighting like jackals for his corpse. Wars of the world had begun. 40
So these are some out of all these guys, four of these guys are his generals, and they're all fighting because he was supposed to tell them, this is Alexander here on his deathbed. He's supposed to tell them who's going to be the next top ruler, but he died before he could do it. That's why they're all fighting with each other.
years off and on they endured. Cassander in Greece, Craterus.
See that said Cassander in Greece. So that one guy just showed was Cassander. He's the one that went towards the west.
Antigonus in Western Asia, Seleucus and Perdiccas in the east.
Then it says Seleucus, right, towards the east. They had the biggest landmass. You look at the map, which we'll show shortly. That's the guy who took over the land from that was mostly in the east. And that's who this little horn we're going to read about Maccabees going forward. He was a descendant of that particular general, as far as that government.
Myself in Egypt.
And that's him. That's supposed to be Ptolemy right here. This guy right here. He's the one that was that had power in the south, which was Egypt. It's supposed to be a younger version of the guy that's narrating.
Until we divided his empire in 4 parts. Cassander certainly proved his will to power, and 7 years later he had Olympius executed. And within 12 years he achieved the complete destruction of Alexander's bloodline when he poisoned Roxana.
So now he's talking about what Cassander did concerning the descendant of Alexander, who Ptolemy felt should have been the next successor to the Grecian kingdom. Now they're in Alexandria, which was actually a city in Egypt, but named after Alexander after they conquered it. This is an older Ptolemy, one of those 4 generals, just talking in hindsight. It's like, I think it says like 40 years later when you look at if you look at the whole movie.
And Alexander's 13-year-old son, the true heir to the empire.
Yeah. But there's other parts, but we'll just stop there. But I just wanted to show that particular scene. But you watch the movie, it has like a lot of other history in there as well. But just wanted to show that last scene where they talk about him dying on his deathbed and how it was split between his 4 generals, which is actually accurate towards history. Because some things in those movies, I think it was Oliver Stone, I think directed that one. So sometimes, for theatrical effect, they might exaggerate certain parts. But all in all, he told the story of Alexander's rise and fall and what happened afterwards. And then as far as the map goes, I'll show you that real quick too. So let me share that next. And folks on the that were watching it, you were able to hear the narration. Just put a yes in the chat. But if you couldn't, it's all good because I was able to explain it anyway, what was happening. But yeah, this is from worldhistory.org. You go into Alexander. So when you zoom in on the map here, it shows you the different regions. This being the Seleucid dynasty towards the east. This being Ptolemais, right, which was in the south. And yet Antigonus and Lysimachus, they went northward from right here, which is Israel down here. And then towards the east, well, actually, he was up here. And then you have Cassandros, which is Cassander. He was westward, that ruled over Greece and other places. So just a depiction of his generals going to the four winds by color code. Okay. All right. So as you go back to First Maccabees 1, where it talks about evils were multiplied in the earth. Okay, kind of the water for the response. So the test was good because sometimes you test something and say, oh, it works, and you do it live, and it's just everything just goes haywire, or it's just like the audience is like, all right, good. So back at First Maccabees 1, we stopped in verse 9, and then we did those visuals as far as that last little cutout from that movie Alexander that came out, I think, back in 2004, and then that map from worldhistory.org. Reading on in verse 10, now I want to read about that little horn that was in Daniel chapter 8, right? That went towards the east and towards the south and towards the pleasant land referring to Israel. It says, and there came out of them a wicked root, Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes. Remember in Daniel 8, it talked about how he will be lifted up, right? So even though he's lifted up in his own mind, his power isn't his own. As you saw that mentioned more than once back in Daniel, that surname Epiphanes, when you look it up in the Greek, it literally means God manifest. So he saw himself as like God manifested on earth. You see his behavior after this time, going forward in the history of the Maccabees. You'll see why, and you'll see how it becomes his undoing. But yeah, that's what it was going into when it talked about how he magnified himself. We go back to Daniel 8, right? So yeah, he really saw himself as like God on earth. Now we know God just means power or authority. And we are gods, like Psalms 82 and 6 tells you. But it says what? We'll die like men and fall like one of the princes of the chiefs because we don't keep the commandments. That goes for us, Israel, that were given the law. Especially goes too for the heathen that weren't given the law but still break it. Remember, like it tells us in Proverbs 14 and 34, righteousness exalted a nation, but sinners are approached to any people. So just because you weren't given the law as a nation doesn't mean you're not going to be held to it. That's why every nation, from the Greeks even to what we see now with Esau, his current empires, they're all going to have a shelf life because they're not ruling according to God's law. They're no different. And as we're going to see, they're true to form. The same antics they were doing back then, Esau is doing those antics now. Whether they were the Greeks or Romans then, whether they're the American and the British now, right? They still do the same stuff because they are their fathers. It says, and there came out of them, I'm in First Maccabees 1 and 10, and there came out of them a wicked root, Antiochus surnamed Epiphanes, son of Antiochus the king, who had been a hostage in Rome, and he reigned in 130th and 7th year of the kingdom of the Greeks. So when you go into the succession, to give an idea of how much time has gone by, this is the fourth, right? So the first Antiochus was shortly after the first Seleucid of the Seleucid dynasty, who was Seleucus, one of Alexander's general. So a little bit of time has gone, but now we have this Antiochus the fourth. he was the son of Antiochus the king, who was the third, obviously. And we're going to read about Antiochus the fifth as well, as going to be a young boy as you read throughout this history of the Maccabees. But it says the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks, to kind of give an idea of how much time has gone by from that 323 BC up until the point that they're at now, right? So if you count that many years, you can get an idea. If you subtract that many years from the 323 BC, you'll get the year of what time they were in. Then it says in verse 11, in those days went there out of Israel wicked men who persuaded many, saying, let us go and make a covenant with the heathen that are round about us. For since we departed from them, we have had much sorrow. So this is what you have, like we might say today, sellouts, right? Are people that sell out, right, to get a piece of the empire that we're captive under. And we see our people from the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom do this today. Try to act, walk, talk, dress like the Edomites or the so-called white people in order to gain favor, right? To ally themselves unto them and trust in men instead of trusting in God, right? So we see them doing this back then too. Because it's not just going to say, okay, let's make an alliance to do trade. That's one thing, but we still keep our laws. They're going to go in full-fledged, right? 2 feet in, trying to be like the Greeks and all their foul customs. It says in verse 12, so this device pleased them well. 13, and certain of the people were so forward herein that they went to the king, who gave them license to do after the ordinance of the heathen, whereupon they built a place of exercise at Jerusalem according to the customs of the heathen. See that? So they built what we call now, well, it was called that then too, but now we call it then and now we call it a gymnasium, right? Which you go into the meaning of that word, we usually will say gym for short, right? If we did like sports, middle school or high school, right? Or if we went to college, we might have done sports. We might, work out ourselves to stay in shape. Nothing wrong with that. But the issue with them was they did it, but they did it in the nude where they're just exposing themselves, right? And you see them trying to emulate that even now with their Olympics, which are just a reflection of the Olympics back then, where today they got people, wearing next to nothing and tight clothes and all this other stuff. That comes from that spirit of what they did before, where you didn't even have those coverings like you have now, right? They just worked out in the nude. You look at the, Greeks and the Romans, but we're focused on the Greeks here. Look at their pottery and paintings. You'll see depictions of this, right? Men running with nothing on, and women too, because women had games also, just like they do today. Throwing discus and javelin and other things like that with no clothes on. So now we got our people following this custom, right? It says in verse 15, and made themselves uncircumcised. So if you're circumcised, right, meaning you cut the foreskin off the flesh of your rod, right, the law says we're supposed to do it for our male children after 8 days, right? How can you make yourself uncircumcised? Can you put your foreskin back on? No. What does this mean? Here's what this is talking about. Because laws that we physically do oftentimes have a spiritual meaning behind them, right? Circumcision is no different. All it's talking about is what? It's using the law of circumcision, which we did for our boys, but it's really talking about what? Circumcising the foreskin of your heart, meaning your mind. It's the same way we want to cut off the deeds of the flesh and its wickedness, foul spiritual ways, even though we're physical, rather. That's spiritually what the circumcision represents. That's even in the Old Testament, right? But we see that being talked about in the New Testament as well. But let's get that in Deuteronomy real quick. Link this with 1 and 15. Deuteronomy chapter 10 and verse 16, which reads, Deuteronomy chapter 10 and verse 16, it says, Circumcise therefore the foreskin of your heart and be no more stiff-necked. So that was that spiritual meaning behind the physical circumcision, right? To circumcise the foreskin of your heart, meaning cutting off the foreskin, cutting off the deeds of the flesh, right? So men and women can be spiritually uncircumcised, right? Because it's talking about you following what? The fleshly ways. And that's what the Greeks did. And that's what we're emulating here. That's why it says they made themselves uncircumcised. But back in First Maccabees 1, let me read 15 again and then continue. It says, and made themselves uncircumcised, and it's going to even explain further here, and forsook the holy covenant or contract, and joined themselves to the heathen, and they were sold to do mischief, right? That's what we talk about being selling out or sold out, right? Meaning you sell out your soul because instead of you being the Most High's property and found his righteousness, you are sold to do mischief, meaning what? You sell out by behaving the way of the strangers around you, and then what? Jeopardizing your chance of salvation, spiritually and physically. Real quick, let me get this too. This is in Peter's. Peter talks about this as well. And the water sister in the chat, she put the a link, I think, in Ezekiel 44, which is Tawab. But this is in Peter's. Second Peter chapter 2. I'm just going to read 1 to 3. Once again, Second Peter chapter 2, I'm going to read 1 to 3. So Second Peter chapter 2 and verse 1, it says, but there were false prophets also among the people, even as there shall be false teachers among you, who privily shall bring in damnable heresies, even denying the Lord that bought them, and bring upon themselves swift destruction. So sadly, had this going on too during the Roman times as well, just like the Greeks. But we see it happening here during the Greek time, which was before this. But yet it's still the same temptation. It's still the same wicked choice. It says in verse 2, and many shall follow their pernicious ways, by reason of which the way of truth shall be evil spoken of. So like we read in Maccabees, we see it happening here too. They're going to speak evil of the truth, righteousness, and praise what the Greeks are about. Then I check this out in verse 3. And through covetousness, right, what someone else has, or fearing what you have already, shall they with feigned words, feign meaning like fake, right, like you're pretending, make merchandise of you, right? That's what the sellout is, right? Being sold to do mischief. Whose judgment now of a long time lingereth not, and their damnation slumbereth not, right? So you thought the Most High was going to wait to bring that judgment upon your head, but now he's going to bring it on you now. So these are things that they warn us about that's going to happen in the last times, right? And we see it happening now in this time too, right? And our people falling for the same tricks, going against the same laws, right, that haven't changed, right? The law will always be the law, right? There's no need for it to evolve or to move into the modern era. The Most High's wisdom is timeless. It works at any time without technology, right? Daniel talked about, the industrial age, the information age, right? How men shall go to and fro, knowledge shall be increased. Daniel 12 and 4. But that doesn't mean we stop being righteous just because we got planes, trains, automobiles, databases, laptops, phones, networks. No, you're still supposed to be righteous, regardless of the tools that are around us. So let's go back to First Maccabees, chapter 1. And let's pick up now in verse 16. Let me get that one. Yeah, let's get one more, and then we'll continue on. So this is also, let me add this one too. I wasn't gonna get it at first, but let me get it. First Kings, just during the time of Elijah, right? One of the most righteous prophets, right? They read about a man of an excellent spirit. First Kings, chapter 21. It's going into his dealings with Ahab, who was an unrighteous king. First Kings 21. First Kings 21 and verse 20, it says, and Ahab said to Elijah, right? He was the king of the northern kingdom at the time. Elijah was a prophet. He says, hast thou found me, O mine enemy? And he answered, I have found thee because thou hast sold thyself to work evil in the sight of Yahweh. See that? So it doesn't matter what your rank or place is in society. Even if you're a king, you can still be sold to do evil. So this is what we don't want to do. Otherwise, like Christ said, you shall have your reward. You just might not like it. All right, so back to First Maccabees 1. Now we're in 16. Now when the kingdom was established before Antiochus, he thought to reign over Egypt. Remember what Daniel 8 said? You should go towards the east and towards the south. Towards the south was what? Egypt. So he's supposed to be ruling over what he already had, which was the east, which was the Seleucid dynasty under Seleucus. But he wanted what the Ptolemies had in the south. Ptolemy being the head over the south, which was Egypt, right? So he wanted to take their land too. It says, he thought to reign over Egypt that he might have dominion of two realms. Wherefore he entered into Egypt with a great multitude, with chariots and elephants and horsemen, and a great navy, and made war with Ptolemy, king of Egypt. But Ptolemy was afraid of him and fled, and many were wounded to death. So there was a time period where, under his rule, he took over that region. Eventually, the Ptolemies would get power over it again, but at this time, he took it over. So that prophecy Daniel gave us back in chapter 8 of his book, we see it's true to form as we see these men doing exactly what that prophecy said. It says, thus they got the strong cities in the land of Egypt, and he took the spoils thereof. And after that Antiochus had smitten Egypt, he returned again in the 140th and 3rd year, right? So from the 137th year, this is like what, about 6 years after that, right? And went up against Israel in Jerusalem with a great multitude. That's why I said back in Daniel 8, he should go what? Towards the east, toward the south, and toward the pleasant land. So here it is here. He's going towards Israel. That's the pleasant land. Verse 21, and entered proudly into the sanctuary and took away the gold altar and the candlestick of light and all the vessels thereof, right? Like we just read in Daniel 8 also, right? He'll try to boast against the Prince of Princes, right? Referring to the Heavenly Father and his Son, right? It says, and the table, the showbread, and the pouring vessels, and the vials, and the censers of gold, and the veil, and the crowns, and the golden ornaments that were before the temple, all which he pulled off. So he went into the temple, started taking things apart and plundering it, right? Only where the sons of Aaron are supposed to go. He's up in there. It says in 23, he took also the silver and the gold and the precious vessels. Also, he took the hidden treasures which he found. 24, and when he had taken all away, he went into his own land, having made a great massacre and spoken very proudly. Right? Once again, magnifying himself. So it's all happened according to the vision. Wherefore there was great mourning in Israel in every place where they were. So the princes and elders mourned, and virgins and young men were made feeble, and the beauty of women was changed. Every bridegroom took up lamentation, and she that sat in the marriage chamber was in heaviness. Right? So no more good times. Now it's bad times. Right? You see this scriptures being said like this. It's kind of like we read about when it talks about the days of Noah are going to be like the days of the second coming, where it says they're going to be married and given in marriage, right? You know, just carrying on like you know, like there's not a care in the world, right? And that you get to partake in the joys of life. But that's not what's happening for us here because of this sore affliction. It says, the land was also moved for the inhabitants thereof, and all the house of Jacob was covered with confusion. And after 2 years fully expired, the king sent his chief collector of tribute into the cities of Judah, who came into Jerusalem with a great multitude, and spake peaceable words unto them. But all was deceit. We read that in Daniel 8 as well, right? Talking about causing craft to prosper in his hand, right? Among other things. But we read that back there as well. So him saying one thing, but then actually doing something else. That's why in Daniel 8 it says, by peace he shall destroy many. So that's what he'll say. He spake peaceable words, but all was deceit. It says, for when they had given him credence, he fell suddenly upon the city and smote it very sore and destroyed much people of Israel. So now it's a common saying that they say today, you know, all's fair in love and war. So no more rules or rules of engagement, rules of war, right? They'll claim them, but then they'll break them at a whim if they can get the advantage. We see that with Esau now as we see it with them back then. It says, and when he had taken the spoils of the city, he set it on fire and pulled down the houses and the walls thereof on every side. But the women and children took their captive and possessed the cattle. So they took the women and children captive and then took our cattle, right? Our most precious things to further the nation. They then builded they the city of David with a great and strong wall and with mighty towers and made it a stronghold for them. So that's a statement. City of David being one of our chief cities, they didn't take it and repurpose it, make it their own, right? To show, yeah, we're the ones in charge. Yeah, your ancestor David may have established this before. Now it's ours for the taking. Verse 34, and they put therein a sinful nation, wicked men, and fortified themselves therein. So put wicked people up in there instead of righteous people of Israel. Verse 35, they stored it also with armor and victuals or food. And when they had gathered together the spoils of Jerusalem, they laid them up there. And so they became a sore snare or a trap. 36, for it was a place to lie in wait against the sanctuary and an evil adversary to Israel. Thus they shed innocent blood on every side of the sanctuary and defiled it. So the Most High, he'll judge a nation, right, as a whole. Sometimes even those that do righteously might suffer affliction and even death, right, depending on the situation. But the whole key is what? No matter what we face, whether it was then or now, if it's meant for us to die due to the wickedness of some, as long as we would walk in righteousness for the rest of our days, however many days the Most High blesses us with, so we might at least have an opportunity to obtain a better resurrection. But it could happen this way, right? Remember, the Most High, he judges the individual, but he judges the nation as well. It says, 38, sorry. Insomuch that the inhabitants of Jerusalem fled because of them, whereupon the city was made a habitation of strangers and became strange to those that were born in her, and her own children left her. Right? So people that grew up there grew up expecting a certain way or living according to a certain custom. Now everything's being changed by the new inhabitants, right? It's like you have a neighborhood, right? That used to be all Israel, right? We lived in there a certain way, and then now you have a heathen come in and buy up the property, and then change it all around to where you go back there years later and you go, wow, this used to be the old neighborhood. Wow, I come back here now, 15, 20 years later, it's totally different. And that's been bought out and changed, and stores and offices that used to be here aren't here anymore. 39, her sanctuary was laid waste like a wilderness. Her feasts were turned into mourning, her Sabbaths into reproach or shame, her honor into contempt. And had been her, rather, as had been her glory, so was her dishonor increased. And her excellency was turned into mourning. So Most High literally flipped the script, right? Our honor and excellency now been twisted into dishonor and mourning by this Antiochus and everything he's approving. Moreover, King Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people. Check this out. 42. And everyone should leave his laws. So all the heathen agreed according to the commandment of the king, right? So overt rule, we see Esau tries to do things more covertly now, where he has the same goal as we see here, but the thing is just to sell it to the people through, books, movie, music, TV shows, other types of medium, to get you to be like them, to get you to be like the Greco-Romans, but then say, oh, it's about all of us coming together, right? Yeah, all coming together to be defiled just like you. But here they pushed it on you. Now they'll suggest it, and if you don't comply, they might punish you, right? If you don't dress how they dress, or talk how they talk, or do what they want you to do, right? So when we read this past, we can see the mirror of how it reflects the same behavior, how their rulers are now in these times too. Verse 43. Yeah, many also the Israelites consented unto his religion and sacrificed unto idols and profaned the Sabbath, right? So doing all these things that they did that we were never supposed to do. Verse 44, for the king had sent letters by messengers unto Jerusalem and the cities of Judah, that they should follow the strange laws of the land and forbid burnt offerings and sacrifice and drink offerings in the temple, and that they should profane the Sabbaths and festival days. So the new moons, the Sabbaths that we're keeping now, cut those out. We got our own customs, right? This is what you're going to do now. That's what he's telling us. It says, and pollute the sanctuary and holy people, set up altars and groves and chapels of idols, and sacrifice swine's flesh and unclean beasts. So wicked sacrifices. Instead of sacrificing the holy clean beasts, according to the righteous custom of the burnt offering and the drink offerings and the peace offerings, et cetera, they got their own sacrifice they want us to do. Just like today, they want us to celebrate their their so-called holidays, which we call holidays, right? And follow their customs. Like there's always that verse we get to in Maccabees. It makes me laugh where it says he made them wear a hat. Doesn't really go into detail, but you just look at it like, made them wear a hat. What? Yeah, you see it now as far as how the make us dress, eat the things they eat, dress the way they dress, practice the same rituals they practice. Verse 48, that they should also leave their children uncircumcised. Now it's going into physical circumcision, right? Which happened because of the spiritual uncircumcision of the people willingly choosing to follow them, right? Enough of us to where the Most High brought that judgment upon all of us at this point. And make their souls abominable, right? Remember, abominable, right? Just means something that's hated or utterly detested. So it's like hate on a high level. So anytime you see abomination or abominable in the scriptures, I know as kids you might have, heard stories or seen shows about they call the abominable snowman, right? And you say, okay, why is he called the abominable snowman? If you actually look at the word, it literally just means something that's hated or detested. That's what an abomination actually is. It says, with all manner of uncleanness and profanation. 49, to the end they might forget the law and change all the ordinances. And whosoever would not do according to the commandment of the king, he said, he should die. Right? So here's the overt rule. Unless you follow their customs, you're supposed to be put to death. In the self same manner wrote he to his whole kingdom and appointed overseers over all the people, commanding the cities of Judah to sacrifice city by city. So he enforced this thing and put his people all throughout Judah that they had conquered and made sure that they did this. Then many of the people were gathered unto them, to wit, everyone that forsook the law, and so they committed evils in the land, and drove the Israelites into secret places, even wheresoever they could flee for succor or for safety help. Right? So the Israelites that didn't want to say what they were saying, do what they were doing, wear what they were wearing, eat what they were eating, they said, all right, we're going to go into secret places, say we can what? Still keep these righteous commandments, right? We're just going to do it on the underground. It says in 54, that the 15th day of the month Keslu, which you go into the calendar, it was a heathen name for the 9th month, right? Sometimes you'll see it spelled Kislev, but it's referring to that same 9th month. It says, in the 140th and 5th year, they set the abomination of desolation upon the altar and built idol altars throughout the city of Jerusalem on every side. So this is another prophecy you read about in Daniel as well. It touches on this, I think, in chapter 9 also of Daniel. This abomination of desolation, right? Going into what? When you go into the history, it talks about they took our righteous altar burnt offering and then put an idol altar on top of it and grafted it in, right? So they took our holy altar, instead of just making their own filthy altar, they decided to take something that was holy, corrupt it, and then turn it into an altar for them and for their false gods. It says, and burnt incense at the doors of their houses and in the streets. This isn't the altar of incense that's in the holy place. This is their own wicked incense. And when they had rent or tore in pieces the books of the law which they found, they burned them with fire. So they did a book burning, but of the righteous law inspired by God, they burned that. And wheresoever was found with any the books of the testament, or if any consented to the law, the king's commandment was that they should be put to death. Thus did they by their authority unto the Israelites every month, to as many as were found in the city. So it was like a quota. Right? Every month they said, okay, how many can we get now that are still trying to do these things, that haven't conformed to the Greco way, to the Greek speak. Now the 5 and 20th day of the month, they did sacrifice upon the idol altar, which was upon the altar of God. See, that's what we're talking about, the abomination that caused desolation. So that 9th and 25th day, remember, this is what we read when we go into the Feast of Dedication, and why we keep it during that time, because as you read on in the history, this horrible day in history was actually reversed due to the mercy of God. But we'll get there when we get there as you read through the story. But right now, this is not a day to be smiled upon at this point, right? The 9th month and 25th day. It says in verse 16, at which time, according to the commandment, they put to death certain women that had caused their children to be circumcised. So like we were reading about during the Passover. I think Consumat was going into this, right? As far as Exodus, I think the first couple chapters of Exodus, Barak, he was saying how, the Hebrew women were lively women, right? To where they wouldn't just kill their children, right? For fear of the Most High, right? So you see that same spirit these sisters had at this time too, saying, look, we're going to still sacrifice forgive me. We're still going to circumcise our boys. Why? Because our law says, right? So you still had brave sisters that did this for their man children, right? And even faced death because of it. That's why it says in verse 61, and they hanged the infants about their necks and rifled their houses and slew them that had circumcised them. Howbeit, many in Israel were fully resolved and confirmed in themselves not to eat any unclean thing. So you still had the sisters and brothers that said, look, we're going to do this anyway, right? To hell with these heathen. If this is going to be the Most High's judgment, then so be it. But if I have to die, I'm going to die in righteousness, right? It doesn't name everybody, but we have this record here to know that what? A remnant of our people always stand against this wickedness that's being forced upon us. Because remember, this is all a judgment that's going to come upon the Greeks. That's why we read about this even to this day. This is something they still have to answer for. And the Most High is already beginning to bring that judgment on them. But it hasn't come upon them as of yet, fully. But it's already happened, right? The beginning of that judgment. But, the Most High, like the expression goes, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. He's going to let them get to the height of wickedness, like we see now, only just pull the rug from under them. So from what they were doing then to wherever they're at now, whether it's here in America or in wherever they're at in Europe or in Asia, because you got them over in what we call Russia today, right? The Most High knows their ancestry and what they did in the past when they were the Greeks and Romans, as well as all the wickedness that they're still doing now in these times. So I was just being stacked up, right, against them. So our people knew this, just like we know this now through the Holy Spirit. And they're going to die in righteousness if that's what it comes to. It says in verse 63, wherefore they read that already. No, I didn't read that. Wherefore they chose rather to die, that they might not be defiled with the meats, and that they might not profane the holy covenant. And so then they died. And there was a great wrath upon Israel. Right? So I want to read this real quick and then continue on with our with chapter 2. But like I was saying earlier when we first started the service, you have certain historical references that might give us some more details into these events in the scriptures. It might be helpful to provide more insight, but never are these to be used or be looked at as the Bible itself, just as a supplement, right? So this is written by actually one of our people in history, this man named Josephus, right? But you go throughout his works, some things were accurate, but some things weren't according to the scriptures. Some things you might just have to hold as being speculation or opinion, right? Not to say that it's wrong, but we can't say that it's true. But let's get some detail. This is in the way they break it up into books and chapters. But this is in book 12 and chapter 5 of the Josephus, right? This mainly deals with the events we just read about. So I'll read through it swiftly, just to kind of get the key things here. And then after we do the next chapter, we'll read the chapter 6 also, because it talks about some of that history also. So this is in the Josephus chapter 5, rather book 12, chapter 5. It says, about this time, upon the death of Onias the high priest, who we actually read about, we will read about Maccabees as well, because he's even mentioned also in the Maccabees during this time. They gave the high priesthood to Jesus, his brother, for that son which Onias left, or Onias for, was yet but an infant. In his proper place, we will inform the reader of all the circumstances that befell this child, right? That's going into Antiochus and his people, how he's going to try to put certain priests in power that he wants, right? But this Jesus, who was the brother of Onias, was deprived of the high priesthood by the king, who was angry with him and gave it to his younger brother, whose name was also Onias. For Simon had these 3 sons, with each of whom the priesthood came, as we have already informed the reader. This Jesus changed his name to Jason, another one that's mentioned in the Maccabees. But Onias was called Menelaus, so they were given new names. So we read about these 2 figures in the Maccabees, right? Now, as the former high priest, Jesus raised a sedition against Menelaus, who was ordained after him. The multitude were divided between them both. So these guys being wicked, unfortunately, doing stuff with this wicked king. They're trying to plot against each other, similar to how the Greeks do. But the greater part of the people, because remember, the Most High is supposed to be the one to appoint the priests and appoint the high priest. But the greater part of the people assisted Jason, and by that means Menelaus and the sons of Tobias were distressed, and retired to Antiochus and informed them that they were desirous to leave the laws of their country and the Jewish way of living according to them, and to follow the king's laws and the Grecian way of living. Wherefore they desired his permission to build them a gymnasium at Jerusalem. See, the same history we just read in this chapter. And when he had given them leave, they also hid the circumcision of their genitals, that even when they were naked, they might appear to be Greeks. Accordingly, they left off all the customs that belonged to their own country and imitated the practices of the other nations. Then it says, number 2, the Antiochus, upon the agreeable situation of the affairs of his kingdom, resolved to make an expedition against Egypt, both because he had a desire to gain it and because he condemned the son of Ptolemy, now as weak and not yet of abilities to manage affairs of such consequence. I'll give it more context or detail behind what we read in this chapter as well, as far as the prophecy that was prophesied in Daniel 8 about him wanting to take not only the east but also the south, referring to his brother Ptolemy and that dynasty down there. It says, so he came with great forces to Pelusium and circumvented Ptolemy Philodemer by treachery and seized upon Egypt. That was the Ptolemy that was there at that time. He then came to the place where the place is about Memphis, and when he had taken them, he made haste to Alexandria in hopes of taking it by siege and by subduing Ptolemy who reigned there. So remember, the oldest Memphis was over there in Egypt, not Memphis, Tennessee, which is actually named after the same Memphis. He was driven not only from Alexandria, but out of all Egypt by the declaration of the Romans, who charged him to let that country alone. So the Romans were there. They weren't the top empire as of yet, but they were in the making at this point, because the Greeks had already been ruling for some time. As you read from this time in the Maccabees going forward, Greeks' rulership would wane, and then the Roman, who were Esau too, their particular empire would come up after them, as the prophecy would also tell us, and history would now dictate to us. It says, accordingly, as I have elsewhere formally declared, I will now give a particular account of what concerns this king, how he subdued Judea and the temple. And in my former work, I mentioned those things very briefly, and have therefore now thought it necessary to go over that history again, and that with great accuracy. Keep in mind, too, that this Josephus, he lived many years after this history, but he was one that pretty much gathered together records and tried to reconcile those records as best he could, right? And then, offer his own viewpoints on things. It says, King Antiochus, returning out of Egypt for fear of Romans, made an expedition against the city of Jerusalem. When he was there in the 143rd year, the reign of the Seleucidae, which is what we just read, he took the city without fighting. Those of his own party opened the gates to him. And when he had gotten possession of Jerusalem, he slew many of the opposite party. And when he had plundered it of a great deal of money, he returned to Antioch. Okay, not that much more. Let me see. And it says, it came to pass after 2 years in the 145th year, on the 25th day of the month, which is called by us called Caslo, and by the Macedonians Apelles. So the Greeks called it Apelles. In the 153rd Olympiad, that the king came up to Jerusalem, and pretending peace, he got possession of the city by treachery, just like we read in the scriptures. At which time he spared not so much as those that admitted him into it, on account of riches that lay in the temple, but led by his covetous inclination, for he saw there was in it a great deal of gold and many ornaments that had been dedicated to it of very great value. And in order to plunder his wealth, he ventured to break the league he had made. So he left the temple bare and took away the golden candlesticks and the golden altar of incense, the table of showbread, and altar of burnt offering, and did not abstain from even the veils, which were made of fine linen and scarlet. He also emptied it of its secret treasures and left nothing at all remaining, and by this means cast the Jews into great lamentation. So this is all on point so far, because it aligns just what we read in the Maccabees. For he forbade them to offer those daily sacrifices which they used to offer to God according to the law. When he had pillaged the holy city, some of the inhabitants he slew, and some he carried captive together with their wives and children. Said the multitude of those captives that were taken alive amounted to about 10,000. Now he's going into specific numbers here. He also burned down the finest building. And when he overthrew the city walls, he built a citadel in the lowest part of the city. For the place was high and overlooked the temple, on which account he fortified with high walls and towers and put into it a garrison of Macedonians. That was the words we just read in verse 38 about it became a habitation of strangers, right? Etc., etc. See if there's anything else that's good here. Rounds and one of the sons their next crosses. Most is more or less the same what we just read. Confessors, colony Medes and Persians and okay, but yeah, I'll stop there. There's a couple other sections, but all in all, the reason why I wanted to just touch on these events in this history book is just to show how the Bible is to be used as a primary source, because people will read a book like this and give this more credit than the Bible, right? But the key is to what? Read the Bible, Holy Spirit as your guide, study those prophecies, right? But then cross-reference them to what we read, say, in a book like this, and just make sure that it aligns with what we read here. And we'll do that again after we go through chapter 2 and get those details that are here in this history book as well, which I think the section here for this part isn't as long. But like I said, use the history book as a supplement to just fill in some details that may not be in the scriptures, but anytime they may make certain points the Bible don't say. And if you're going to quote the history, just say according to this book, according to this author. Give a citation. Just do it like that. So by studying the scriptures, we're taught many different skills we may have never learned in school. It's not something to take lightly, because that's the beauty of the Holy Scriptures, because they'll have you go into different things, develop certain talents and gifts that you may have not have before. It's a good reason to do it, because it's all about bettering ourselves and building up the nation, right, with the gifts that we have. Like Paul tells us, right, let all things be done unto edifying, right? Our gifts aren't just for show. So this is First Maccabees chapter 2 in verse 1. It says, in those days arose Mattathias, the son of John, the son of Simeon, a priest of the sons of Joarib from Jerusalem, and dwelt in Modin. And he had 5 sons, Johanan called Caddis, Simon called Thasai, Judas who was called Maccabeus, Eleazar called Avaron, and Jonathan whose surname was Apis. So now we're getting into a particular family, right, that these books are named after, right? But their forefather, Mattathias, right? It says he came from the sons of Aaron. It says particularly of Joarib, right? So he came out of this particular house of Joarib, who was a reckoned house of Aaron. And it names his sons. Out of his 5 sons, we're going to read about 3 in particular, right? Simon, Judas, and Jonathan, right? They're the most notable out of the 5 sons, right? But now just to get this reference of him being from Joarib, right? So link this with 2 and 1. Let's go to Chronicles real quick. Let's go to Chronicles. First Chronicles 23. No, 24. Yeah, 24. First Chronicles 24. In verse 1. I'll start from 1, but then I'll go down to about 7. 7 is where the name is, but just so we know what we're talking about here. So it's going all the way back to David's time, right? But then it's breaking down not only just David's actually going into Aaron's house and talking about the ancestors of Aaron pretty much in his house, but then going into who David was dealing with on his time to try to decide what priests were responsible for what. But it says in 1 Chronicles 24:1, now these are the divisions of the sons of Aaron. The sons of Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. Right? So Aaron had 4 sons. It says in verse 2, but Nadab and Abihu died before their father and had no children. Therefore, Eleazar and Ithamar executed the priest's office. You read Leviticus chapter 10, the first couple of verses. You see a history where his 2 eldest boys, not Eleazar, Nadab and Abihu, and it says they offered strange fire or strange incense, right? So they tried to do something different against what the law said as far as what kind of incense was supposed to be burned in the holy place. So the Most High destroyed them on the spot, and even told Moses and Aaron, let the people mourn for your 2 oldest sons, but you guys don't cry. I was like, damn, that's wild. But the Most High trying to set a precedent. Like, look, Aaron, I have you set apart to be the priest. People who are supposed to look to you to be the righteous representation of me on earth, right? So I'm taking this very serious. And your 2 younger sons, I'm gonna have them be set up to be the priests because your 2 elder boys acted out. It says in verse 3, and David distributed them both Zadok, the son of Eleazar, and Abimelech, the sons of Ithamar, according to the offices in their service. So from the time of Moses and Aaron to the time of David, you had Zadok and Eleazar. They were like the 2 representatives, or rather Zadok and Abimelech, that came from those respective lineages, Eleazar and Ithamar. It says in verse 4, and there were more chief men found the sons of Eleazar than the sons of Ithamar. And thus were they divided. Among the sons of Eleazar, there were 16 chief men of the houses of their father, and 8 according to the sons of Ithamar, according to the house of their fathers, right? So it was like a double, 16 for Eleazar and only 8 for Ithamar. But they all came from Aaron, right? But they kept track of who came from one son versus who came from another son. Now check this out. Thus were they divided by lot, one sort with another, for the governors of the sanctuary and the governors of the house of God were of the sons of Eleazar and the sons of Ithamar. It says, in Shemaiah, the son of Nathaniel the scribe, one of the Levites, wrote before them before the king and the princes, and Zadok the high priest, and Ahimelech the son of Abiathar, and before the chief of the fathers of the priests and Levites, one principal household being taken for Eleazar and one taken for Ithamar. It's now going to cast lots for their respective families. Now it says that the first lot came forth to Jehoiarib, the second to Jedediah. So now it's going into what lots fell upon which men from those houses. So we see the first one being mentioned here is this Jehoiarib. So this same Jehoiarib here, you might look at this and read Chronicles and go, okay, so-and-so begat so-and-so, so-and-so begat so-and-so, boring. Now we can connect the dots and see many years later after this time, the Most High would have this family come out of that Jehoiarib, this Mattathias and his sons. So, don't take Chronicles and Kings and Chronicles lightly. These names and these lineages are important, right? And it shows the importance of nationality in general, but then also, the importance of reckoning bloodlines. And when it comes to, us as a people, we may not be able to pinpoint these things now, but these things are definitely important. And, we see with the heathen, they try to do the same thing and how they mess it up. They'll say, oh, we go through the mom's side, right? Or, they'll go outside of what the scriptures say. But that's 1 Chronicles 24, 1-7 to link with 2 and 1. But let's continue on in the story back in Maccabees. So now we're back in Maccabees 2, 1 Maccabees 2. It says, I'm in verse 6. Since we already read about the 5 sons, right, that he would have. Verse 6, it says, when he saw the blasphemies that were committed in Judah and Jerusalem, he said, Woe is me, wherefore was I born to see this misery of my people and of the holy city, and to dwell there when it was delivered into the hand of the enemy, and the sanctuary into the hand of the strangers. So he's saying, woe is me to be alive to see these horrible things happen, right? For Jerusalem to fall. Because, at this point, we were doing all right. Because what happened was what? You had our people go back into the land after the time of the Medo-Persian captivity, right? So these people are descendant of those that went back to rebuild what they call in history the exile period, which you read about that during Ezra and Nehemiah's time, right? Where you had Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Jesus, son of Josedek, right? One being the representative of the line of David, one being representative of the line of Aaron, and them kind of leading the first wave of folks back into Israel. Then later, a little bit later on, you had Ezra representing the house of Aaron, and then you had Nehemiah representing the house of Judah, being the next group, bringing in the next group of Israelites back into Jerusalem to build back up, right? So, the Medo-Persian captivity wasn't too long ago, leading up to this point. It was only maybe like a little over 100 years or so, probably around maybe closer to 200. But now it's like going through what happened with Babylon all over again, right? With these other nations coming in and destroying us. And he's saying, woe is him to have to be able to witness this. It says in verse 8, her temple has become as a man without glory. Remember, they rebuilt the temple that was destroyed by the Babylonians. Now this temple is being destroyed. It says, her glorious vessels are carried away into captivity. Her infants are slain in the streets, her young men with the sword of the enemy. What nation have not gotten a part of her kingdom and gotten of her spoils, right? So all the heathen had a piece of Israel, right? Whether it was that time or the times before, right? This is also why we say, and we read that in Jeremiah, where it says what? Every one of them shall go into captivity because of this, right? I think it was Jeremiah 30 and 16. Because you may say, well, okay, it's just a so-called white man. No, that's just now. But every nation had us in captivity one point or another throughout the history, even going back to the time of the judges. Yeah, let me just read that real quick. Just a little something to little something to comfort the brothers and sisters. All praise to the Most High. This is the last go round. This is Jeremiah chapter 30 and verse 16. It reads, therefore all they that devour thee shall be devoured, and all thine adversaries, every one of them, shall go into captivity. And they that spoil thee shall be a spoil, and all that prey upon thee will I give for a prey. So the Greeks here, guilty as charged, but everyone else too. That's not of the 12 tribes. As you go throughout the history, you'll see they've all had us in captivity at one point or another. So you can link that with, oops, I'm in the wrong place. You could link that with 2 and 10. Jeremiah 30:16. Verse 11, 1 Maccabees 2:11, it says, all her ornaments are taken away. Of a free woman, she is become a bond slave, right? So she was once Sarah, right? The free woman. Now she's become a bond slave like Hagar, right? Figuratively speaking. And behold, our sanctuary, even our beauty and our glory is laid waste, and the Gentiles have profaned it. Who's a Gentile? A Goyim. What's a Goyim? The nations. Any nation that's not of the 12 tribes. It says, to what end therefore shall we live any longer? Right? So it's just like, man, why should we even live with in these why should we even live given these harsh conditions that we're facing right now? Right? So these are the things that the wise do when they see horrible things like this happening, right? Like it tells you in Ezekiel, put a mark upon the heads of the men that sigh and that cry for the abominations that be done in the midst. So Mattathias is like doing that before the time, right? He's a good example of that. seeing all these horrible things happening to Israel because of the sins of our people. It says, then Mattathias and his sons rent their clothes and put on sackcloth and mourned very sore because they were righteous. They knew exactly what was happening and why. In the meanwhile, the king's officers, such as compelled the people to revolt, came into the city Modin to make them sacrifice. It's the city where they were at, Mattathias and his sons, and those with them. And when many of Israel came unto them, Mattathias also and his sons came together, right? So they all gathered together to do the sacrifice they normally would do, even though the law was passed. What? No one should do sacrifices that were righteous. They're supposed to do what the heathens did. And when many of Israel, and answered the king's officers and said to Mattathias on this wise, thou art a ruler and an honorable and great man in this city, and strengthened with sons and brethren. So, the Greeks, they had some tact, right? They were wicked, but they had some tact, right? They said, okay, if we can get to those of Israel, just like anybody they fought and took over, we can get to those that we conquered that are influential, right? They carry a little bit of juice with the people. If we can get them to convert to our ways, it'll make our jobs easier, right? So that's why they're coming to him, because they know, okay, in that particular city, that this Mattathias, he's a man of reputation. People look up to him. Similar to what they do now, right, with our so-called leaders, our so-called celebrities, right? Try to get them to say and do and wear things and get the people to follow suit. It says, now therefore come thou first and fulfill the king's commandment, like as all the heathen have done. Yeah, and the men of Judah also, and such as remain at Jerusalem. So shalt thou and thine house be in the number of the king's friends, and thou and thy children shall be honored with silver and gold and many rewards. Right? So they make the indecent proposal. They say, hey, listen, you just go our way, right? You show the others that it's cool, and we'll hook you up. You'll be side by side with us, right? We'll make you a VIP, right, amongst ours. It says, in Mattathias answered and spake with a loud voice, to all the nations that are under the king's dominion, obey him, and fall away every one from the religion of their fathers, and give consent to his commandments. Now, when he says religion here, remember, religion just means any system to follow a higher power. We know religions of the world clearly are idolatry, but what we deal with, we don't like to call it a religion so it doesn't get lumped into those other religions. But technically, it is a religion. It's just a system or customs of following the true and living God. But usually when we teach, we don't do that because we know it's just going to be confusing for folks. Just so we have to clarify when we say Christian. We are Christian, but not Christian as far as how the world sees Christian. Right? Just be careful with the words you use so that you don't lose the audience. But for those of us that can, eyes that can see, ears that can hear, and a heart to understand, we know what Mattathias means here when he says religion, right? He's talking about the law, statutes, and commandments, right? Which are our code that we follow to serve the true and living God. It says, yet will I and my sons and my brethren walk in the covenant of our fathers. God forbid that we should forsake the law and the ordinances. We will not hearken to the king's words to go from our religion, either on the right hand or the left. So he's making this loud and stern declaration, right? Knowing the risk involved. But he said, you know what? I want to make this stand, because if we don't make this stand now, when will we, right? It's going to take us all out and take out all Israel. So Mattathias, the head of the family, he's making this stand, right? Including all his sons see this, so they're going to take heed to their father's example and go, okay, dad's not playing. Let's make sure we hold it down too. It says in verse 23, now when he had left speaking these words, there came one of the Jews in the sight of all to sacrifice on the altar which was at Modin according to the king's commandment. So as soon as he made this declaration, here we got someone that's sold to do mischief, right? A sellout, going to bring their offering to the king, the king of the Greeks, right? Oh boy. Verse 24, which thing when Mattathias saw it, he was inflamed with zeal and his reins trembled, neither could he forbear to show his anger according to judgment. Therefore he ran and slew him upon the altar. So if you weren't sure if Mattathias was just about talk, he gave a great speech. Now he's not just demonstrating with words, he's demonstrating with deeds. He's following through and saying, look, I meant what I said, right? So you guys realize that we're about business. He went ahead and just off the guy right there. His own brother, but yet and still his brother was going off. So, like I said, you reading the law, this wasn't a strange thing for us to do, at least before, Christ kind of came on the scene. But still, to set the precedent, you had to do this, right? Especially as everybody saw it, because I can imagine, even though it's not written, I can imagine people hearing what Mattathias is saying and going, yeah, those that are with me. Then they look to their left and they see the guy going to the altar, and they probably look right back at Mattathias like, right? So Mattathias, being that leader, he followed through on his words. It says, and slew him upon the altar. It says in 25, also the king's commissioner who compelled men to sacrifice, he killed at that time, and the altar he pulled down, right? So the commissioner was there. He took him out also, and he pulled down the altar. So the brother that was selling out, and even the Greek that was there, administering the whole process. Then it says in 26, thus dealt he zealously for the law of God, like as Phinehas did it to Zambri, the son of Salem, right? So who remember this reference here in 2 and 26? Let's get it real quick in Numbers 25. And it's funny because this is actually one of his ancestor, right? When you go back to this. So this Phinehas, right? He was the grandson of Aaron, son of Eleazar, I believe. At least one of the sons. Let's go back to Numbers 25 real quick. So this is the importance of legacy, right? Acknowledging and knowing where you come from and standing on it. That's the blessing for us to be able to see who we are as a people, so we can do the same in these times, right? So this is Numbers 26. I'm sorry, not 26, 25. Here we go. 25 and verse 6. Sometimes I get the numbers and chapters mixed up. So Numbers 25 and verse 6, it reads, and behold, one of the children of Israel came and brought unto his brethren a Midianitish woman in the sight of Moses and in the sight of all the congregation of the children of Israel, who were weeping before the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, right? Because it's right around the time when you read about when we were in the wilderness, Israel had gone off following this idol of the strangers that are around us as we were traveling through the wilderness. This idol called Baal Peor, right? They were following that, and they were going about pretty much purging those who were following this false idol. So it's like you can kind of relate the scenario and the timing here to what Mattathias is doing during this time with the Greeks, right? Where the people are willingly going to follow this idol of the Greeks. Our people are following idols at this time too in the wilderness, right? But then it says in verse 7 of Numbers 25, and when Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, saw it, he rose up from amongst the congregation and took a javelin in his hand, verse 8, and he went after the man of Israel into the tent and thrust both them through, the man of Israel and the woman, through her belly. So the plague was stayed from the children of Israel, because we weren't supposed to physically marry their women or their men, right? And we definitely weren't supposed to marry their gods. And that's oftentimes what will lead to that. As the Most High told us in the law, especially when it came to the Canaanites, he said, don't take their wives unto you or take their husbands, because if you do that, they're going to take your heart from following me to following their gods, right? Like the saying goes, you don't just marry your spouse, you marry your spouse's family. And what's the family into? They're in the idols. You're going to have that pressure on you now, right? To do what they do, dress how they dress, celebrate how they celebrate. So Phinehas at this time is setting a precedent, right? By taking out his brother who's committing this sin and committing this wickedness. Then it says in verse 9, and those that died in the plague were 20 and 4,000, right? So you had that many people that died due to this plague before Phinehas did this. Reading on, it says, and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, had turned my wrath away from the children of Israel, while he was zealous for my sake among them, that I consume not the children of Israel in my jealousy. Wherefore say, behold, I give unto him my covenant of peace, or my contract of peace, and he shall have it, and his seed after him, even the covenant of an everlasting priesthood, because he was zealous for his God, and made an atonement for the children of Israel. And the name of the Israelite that was slain, even that was slain with the Midianitish woman, was Zimri, the son of Salu, prince of the chief of the house among the Simeonites. It says, in the name of the Midianitish woman that was slain was Kobzi, the daughter of Zur. He was head over a people and of the chief house in Midian, right? So she was from a different nation, right? But we see here him representing, right? Him acknowledging what the Most High said and setting that precedent by following through on what the Most High said to be and to do. That's Numbers 25, 69, and we read 10 to 15. You can link that with 2 and 26. So we see Mattathias upholding that legacy of his ancestor Phinehas here. So let's go back to 1 Maccabees. Let's read on in verse 27. And Mattathias cried throughout the city with a loud voice, saying, whosoever is zealous of the law and maintaineth the covenant, let him follow me. Right? So he's calling all those that believe and that trust in the Most High to come and follow him. Right? Kind of makes you think also too of Exodus 32 with the golden calf a little bit. When Moses came down from the mount, threw down the tablets, and he pretty much yelled out the same thing. He said, whoever's on the Lord's side, come with me. And it's like, said like, I think 3,000 Levites came to him, and he said, fall on them. Man, it must have been quite a day, to be there. Some of us right now, we might have been there. God forbid, we might have been one of those folks that were, celebrating the golden calf. But yikes. But anyway, let's read on. It says, so he and his sons fled into the mountains and left all that ever they had in the city. So time to go underground, because we know physically the Greeks are stronger, got more wealth than them, but yet and still they got the Most High to protect them, even though they're on the run at this point. They got to pretty much wage a guerrilla warfare at this point, right? Hit and run tactics, all that, but they still got the spirit, as we're going to see as you read on. It says in verse 29, then many that sought after justice and judgment went down into the wilderness to dwell there, both they and their children and their wives and their cattle, because the afflictions increased sore upon them. And at least they're on home turf, right? So they know the meadows, they know the valleys, right? They know the caves, they know their own terrain, right? So at least they had that to their advantage, right? To know where to go, to know where to hide. All the while, the Most High, being with them as far as their faith, to make this stand against a more powerful enemy, these Greeks, just like we did before in the wilderness, right? Against much stronger adversaries when it came to those other Hamites that we were up against, and also other nations. It says, now when it was told the king's servants and the host that was at Jerusalem in the city of David, that certain men who had broken the king's commandment were going down into the secret places in the wilderness, they pursued after them a great number, and having overtaken them, they camped against them and made war against them on the Sabbath day. Right? So in warfare, they say the key is to know your enemy, right? Know your enemies coming and going, right? Their ins, their outs, right? Their ways. So you can take advantage. So the Greeks, using these tactics, they knew the Jews' customs. They knew especially about the Sabbath day. So they said, we know when it comes to these Jews, they're mighty. Yeah, they got some mighty warriors amongst them, but we know when it comes to the Sabbath, they rest. So that's when we strike. We catch them when they're not expecting it, right? And we're going to see them employ these tactics throughout the Maccabees. We see them even apply these tactics even to this day. right? Where they'll try to attack when they think that your guard is down, or when they think that you're going to be at ease or at rest, right? Whether it be like a certain day of celebration, or if it be like at nighttime. That's a big one for Esau to attack at night, right? We're going to see him even employ this during the time of the Maccabees too, but we see him even employ that in these modern times as well. I remember I went with my old man to see that movie when it came out. The story about when they allegedly attacked Osama bin Laden, right? The most dreaded enemy of the United States, who somehow was on the United States payroll, right? It's kind of odd, trained by the United States, went to United States schools, but they became the United States number one enemy. Not to go too much into it, but maybe I'm emphasizing is they allegedly found him in Pakistan. They attacked him at night, and in the movie I think it was called like Zero Dark 30. They attacked him pretty much at midnight in 30 minutes. That's when they sprung the trap on him, and they finally got him. Hiding out in Pakistan allegedly. At least that's the story they tell us. There's some information out there that say they found him years before that, but you can't trust your enemy, right? So you kind of just read what you can and try to put together the best conclusion based on the evidence that you have when it comes to Esau, when it comes to his news and his history. But yeah, they even employed that, like I said, in the modern warfare to attack at night, because they're hoping that they catch you off guard, catch you when you're asleep, right? Like I said, we just go on to the Maccabees. We'll see that that technique being employed as well, and then we'll see our soldiers be wise to it and then respond accordingly. So it says they wanted to try to attack them on the Sabbath. Let me read 34 again. Oh, sorry. Where am I at? 32. I'll read 32 again. It reads, and they pursued after them a great number, and having overtaken them, they camped against them and made war against them on the Sabbath day. 33. And they said unto them, let that which you have done hitherto suffice. Come forth and do according to the commandment of the king, and you shall live. So offering them another chance, right, to proverbially take the knee, right? We offered you this stance before. You refused it, but clearly, look, you're at a disadvantage. You're out here in the wilderness hiding out. Clearly we're the stronger force. Just submit. And when they said, we will not come forth, neither will we do the king's commandment to profane the Sabbath day. So then they gave them the battle with all speed, howbeit they answered them not, neither cast they a stone at them, nor stopped the places where they lay hid, but said, let us die in all our innocency. Heaven and earth shall testify for us that you put us to death wrongfully. Right? So they did well here, right? And we see that we have this record to remember their stance, to die in righteousness against the stronger foe, these Greeks, knowing that the Most High would protect them in this life, and if not this life, definitely in the life to come. Because remember, besides being translated, to die a martyr's death is the greatest way to die. And we see even with our Lord and Savior, he experienced both, right? Where he died a martyr's death and he was translated, right? So for these folks to be martyred for standing against righteousness, they will obtain that better resurrection, right? It says at 38, so they rose up against them in battle on the Sabbath, and they slew them with their wives and children and their cattle to the number of 1,000 people. Now Mattathias and his friends understood thereof. They mourned for them right sore. And one of them said to another, if we all do as our brethren have done, and fight not for our lives in laws against the heathen, they will now quickly root us out of the earth. Right? So they heard what happened to their fellow Israelites that were doing the same, hiding out, right? Trying to keep the laws just on a sneak tip. But then they took counsel among themselves and realized, damn, they're going to try to employ this tactic to where let us take us all out. So we're going to see what they're going to do in response. And at that time, therefore, they decreed, saying, whosoever shall come to make battle with us on the Sabbath day, we will fight against him, neither will we die all as our brethren that were murdered in the secret places. You see that? So they did a council among themselves to say, look, if they come against us on the Sabbath, we still fight. Because otherwise, they're just going to kill us all off and employ this tactic over and over again until they win. And we'll see as you read on if the Most High was with the council of these brothers that decided this. Because now I'm thinking about we're reading the Gospels, right, where Christ and his disciples come back from a long journey, right, and it says they were picking corn, and the Pharisees wanted to pick at Christ when they saw him and his disciples doing it on the Sabbath and say, "What's going on here? Why you guys out here picking corn on the Sabbath?" And Christ had to clarify for them what these brothers already understood, which was it's lawful to do well on the Sabbath day. The Sabbath wasn't made. Make sure I get it right. The Sabbath wasn't made for man, but man wasn't made for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath was made for man. Wow. I feel like was it George Bush? Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me once, fool me. It can't be fooled again. Right. So he said the man wasn't made for the Sabbath was made for man, right? So in other words, it's like, yes, we rest on that day, but if necessity require, do what you have to do. If you lose your last sheep, go in the ditch and get it. If it fell in the ditch on the Sabbath. If someone needs help or needs medicine or needs something, you're supposed to buy on the Sabbath. Do it if your brother or sister has need, right? So they clearly had a need. They sat down and had counsel in righteousness. The why behind what they were doing was sound. So as we're going to see, I'm kind of spoiling it, but the Most High was with them in that counsel, as we're going to see going forward. But because why they came to that conclusion was a sound reason, right? Because remember, there's what we say and do, and then there's why we do it, right? Unless you understand both, you really can't discern matters, whether it be small matters or great matters. But it says, 42, then came there unto him a company of Assyrians, who were mighty men of Israel, even all such as were voluntarily devoted unto the law. So another band of Israelites that call themselves Assyrians paired with them. Because that's what the Most High will do, right? When you make that stance in righteousness, you might be small, but you'll realize that, dang, you know what? I thought it was just me and my small group here that were standing for righteousness, but the Most High will show you in time, you're not alone. There's others like you, right? I'm going to lead your paths to find them, and you guys find each other. You guys can build up your resources, right? And come together and be strong against this enemy. But you have to believe on me first and take that stance first, right? And then I'll show you.
There's two comments. One on the Sabbath. The ultimate purpose of the Sabbath is to acknowledge that the Most High is the Creator. In a world where the Most High, the creation itself, is being questioned by so many people, so many philosophies, so many religions, and so many sects, right, of people, they question the creation.
Mm-hmm.
Just observing the Sabbath spiritually in your mind just prove that you adhere to the Most High being the Creator, and He's the author of creation and everything that we see and don't see. So that's the first thing. So that's why the Most High, when He created everything, and He stepped back and He observed everything that He created, said, "Man, that was good." Just taking a step back, doing the same thing, you acknowledge that the Most High is the Creator. So that's the first, thing that anybody should have in mind when it comes to the Sabbath. It's like observing the Sabbath as the Most High's creation, right? And another thing is James 1:27. It's like sometimes they mention about religion. Sometimes we take words, and then sometimes we take words and then we give it a definition based on what we feel is good at the time when we're trying to break it down to somebody. Right? When you look at the word religion itself, they have many definitions. But one of the root word of it is from Latin, which is religare, right? When you think you be connected, you connected to it. It's like connection. It's like religion supposed to be something that is pure to connect you to something or to a belief system or whatever you believe in, God or many gods. But if you believe in the Most High, religion supposed to bring you back to the belief that the Most High is the creator of everything. Right? So when we read James 1:27, it further edifies the word itself is not the problem, but if religion is corrupt and their belief is corrupt, then all religions are corrupt. Right? But the word itself is not the problem.
Mm-hmm. Come.
So when we read in James 1:27, it says pure religion and undefiled before power, before the Most High and the Father, is this: to visit the fatherless and widows in their afflictions, and to keep himself unspotted from the world. So keeping ourselves unspotted, meaning stay away from anything that is against what the Most High taught in his word. Right? So keeping unspotted. That's true religion. So we see right here, true religion is being used, but sometimes say, you know what religion means? It means to divide and then, and restrain. But in reality, when you are connected, is a reconnect. So we connect you back to your power. Yeah. But when the word is being distorted, then it's anybody's guess. That's why you got to be very mindful of how those words are being used.
Excellent point. So much damage control we got to do out there, Ken. For the basic words we use, because our enemy, they hijack, like you said, they'll hijack certain words, and like you said, they won't necessarily change the meaning per se all the time, but the perspective on words, they'll kind of change.
Right.
Like love, like sin, like religion, right? They hold people's hand and go, what does it mean to serve a higher power? What does it mean to love according to the scriptures, right? What does it mean to sin according to the scriptures? Because, or, even symbols like the rainbow. It's not the rainbow that's corrupt. It's their rainbow. They've taken the rainbow and made it something else. But the Most High's rainbow is pure. So you have to always go through these things and just kind of extract the thing itself from the supposed meaning that our oppressor has put on top of it.
Like when people say, I don't follow religion. You shouldn't follow religion. Religion is supposed to connect you back to the Most High. Religion is the mind to connect back to your true power. Mm-hmm. It's not following the Baptists, follow Methodists, right? Follow take one book and then create a belief out of it, mm-hmm. and then that's your religion. If that's the case, then you contribute to corrupting the word religion. But the true religion, when it's reading James 1:27, that's what it means. It has some action behind it that shows, the action shows what the person really believes.
I like about that verse too. I think we just read this not too long ago. I forgot why this verse came up, but one of us pulled this same verse. But the beautiful thing about this is you can connect it right back to the law, statutes, and commandments to show, just like Mattathias was talking about when he mentioned religion, like you're just bringing out Kahan, it had to do with what? Our code of conduct, how we serve the true and living power. This is Exodus 22. Exodus 22, verses 22 down to 24, which is what James is making a reference to. Exodus 22 and verse 22, it reads, you should not afflict any widow or fatherless child. It says in verse 23, if thou afflict them in any wise, right, because they're particular figures in the nation who don't have a man to defend them, right? If any other man would try to cause them harm, them being weaker. If thou afflict them in any wise, and they cry at all unto me, the Most High, I will surely hear their cries, and the Most High will stand up in their defense. You try to do this. And my wrath shall wax hot, and I will kill you with the sword, and your wives shall be widows, and your children fatherless. So the Most High will put it right back on you. Right? You want to afflict the widows and fatherless? Well, guess what? You have a wife, you got kids. Yeah, they're about to join the club because now you're out of here. So the Most High's judgment is just so pure and it makes so much sense when you look at it. It's like, it's got me thinking about too. the famous scene with Saul, Agag, King of Amalekites, and Samuel, right? Where Samuel gave him the Most High judgment, saying, because you didn't follow through and kill off the Amalekites and fear the people. I picked your neighbor David, who's better than you, to be king, right? All that kind of thing. And then Saul's repentant, leaves, and then it's just Samuel and this king Agag left. He's like, surely the business of death is past, right? Like, everything's cool now, right? Samuel's like, judgment is not to go down. It's not even. And he kind of echoes this law where he's like, so the same way that you made, women childless, so now shall your mother be childless among women. Like, that's pretty much what he says to him. And it says he hewed him in pieces before the Lord there in Gilgal. He killed the king himself, Samuel. See, it's one of those scenes, right? When you read it and you say, these are men of God, right? You think of men of God, usually what we're given as far as the world, Christianity, what we teach, when they teach about men of God, they usually teach men of God are always, hugs and kisses, right? That's just a part of it, right? As far as, having compassion and everything. But they don't talk about or go into how men of God, Old and New Testament, were killers, not murderers, but killers when the situation called for, right? They don't talk about that part. And for obvious reason, because they take the truth, and they try to change it so that they can use it as a means of control, right? To make Esau the friend, to make his subjects, passive, right? Pushovers, so he could have his way with them. We get to read the book in its entirety and get the right understanding when we break this thing down. Somebody to handle. So let's go back to First Maccabees. Like we always talk about at camp, right? It's like, this is not Christ. This Charles Manson, Woodstock-looking, long hair, blue eyes. This is not the Christ. And everything that you saw growing up with these movies, that wasn't the Christ. First Maccabees 1 and Gentiles, Mattathias 41. So 42. I read this already, but I'll read it again. Then came there unto him a company of Assyrians who were mighty men of Israel, even all such as were voluntarily devoted unto the law. And all they that fled for persecution joined themselves unto them, and they were a stay unto them. So they joined their forces and smote sinful men in their anger, and wicked men in their wrath. But the rest fled to the heathen for succor. Right? So they were coming for Greeks standing post. They were coming from our people that were with them. Right? So they were building up their forces and taking out sellouts where they could find them. And he said the sellouts that got away, it says they ran to the heathen for help. We got those Hebrews over there. They're going against the king, the king of the Greeks. We're loyal to you. We serve you. God, what a horrible sight. God forbid I was one of those men running to the heathen for protection. Lord knows. But oof. It says in verse 45, then Mattathias and his friends went round about and pulled down the altars. And what children soever they found within the coast of Israel, uncircumcised, those they circumcised valiantly, right? So made sure that circumcise our boys, right? If they hadn't gotten circumcision because, the mothers didn't get a chance to, or the mothers were afraid. They weren't those brave women we read about, earlier in last chapter, but those women that wanted to go along, or they had fathers that wanted to go along and not circumcise their boys. Verse 47, they pursued also after the proud men, and the work prospered in their hands, and the Most High is with them. They might be at a tactical disadvantage, being on the run, right? Kind of doing guerrilla hit and run tactics and all that, hiding out in the wilderness. But the Most High is with them, right? Kind of also makes you a little bit think about the whole controversy with Saul and David, right? Where David went on the run from Saul because he saw his life, without a cause, and the Most High added unto him too, right? With was like 400 men, I think, when he was at the cave of Adullam. And then from there, it's like his force is built from there, right? Even though he was on the run, the Most High was still with them, even though Saul had the tactical advantage with, forces and weapons and everything else, munitions, etc. It says, so they recovered the king recovered the loss out of the hand of the Gentiles, out of the hand of kings, neither suffered they the sinner to triumph. Because remember, we read that last chapter, they were burning up the books of the law, burning them, right? And you just read that, I think, last night in Acts, right? How they were burning those books with curious art to them. You burn those, but burn the Most High's law? Really? So yeah, they took those back. Probably even wrote some new ones, right? They were priests, so they probably did that. It says in verse 49, now when the time drew near that Mattathias should die, he said unto his son. So he was an older man even doing all this, right? But yet and still, he made that stance because he knew that it wasn't just about him. It was about those that come after him too, right? It wasn't like how sometimes you have the elderly when they, because anyone could be fearful of death, whether you're a small child or elderly person. But he knew it was about those that came after him. And like we see, he made that righteous example to make a stand, to be that example for his sons and all those that were with him that would carry on the fight after him. Now, therefore, my sons, I skipped something. Now, when the time drew near that Mattathias should die, he said unto his sons, now have pride and rebuke gotten strength, talking about the Greeks, in the time of destruction, in the wrath of indignation, right? Which is, the Most High using them. Verse 50, now therefore, my sons, be ye zealous for the law and give your lives for the covenant of our fathers, right? And he can say this because he didn't just talk about it, he demonstrated. We read that right above in the chapter, right? Or was it last chapter? No, above in this chapter, right? That he was a man of action, not just a man of words, right? Now, remember, both are important. You can't just be like deeds and no words or words and no deeds. You need both, right? Because, without words to make sense of a matter, it's easy for your deeds to be a blunder and you make a mistake. At least use your words to find out as much as you can. And then from there, you make a decision. Even if there's risk involved, try to mitigate that risk as best you can, given the situation. But you got to talk through things sometimes, too. It says in verse 51, call to remembrance what acts your fathers did in their time, so shall ye receive great honor in an everlasting name. It says, wasn't Abraham found faithful? What's the word you guys have after faithful? I got the 16.
Temptation.
Okay, come. In temptation, and it was reputed him for righteousness. When you go back to Genesis 22, it talks about that, right? Where he was told by the angel to offer his son. Right before he did, the angel came and said, it's okay. It's what a seed. If you're going to trust, if you're going to have faith. And it tells you that that Abraham believed on the Lord and it was imputed for him for righteousness. Showing you that, while Christ may have brought the faith in the forefront of our minds, it was always there, even back then, the importance of faith. And the other fruits of the Spirit, as well. Then it says in 53, Joseph, in a time of distress, kept the commandment and was made Lord in Egypt, going back to Genesis 41. So Mattathias calling upon all these things, right? Their forefathers, all the righteous things that they did, to be an inspiration for them now, right? Because we are our ancestors, right? That's our stock. That's who we come from. I remember you were telling us about that in a lot of your travels, Khan, as far as you going overseas, and you see how in those different countries in Europe, even though they're the wicked, you see how they take pride in certain things that they can relate back to their ancestors that they did, certain customs or certain traditions that they remember. And then when it comes to us, here in the West, Israel, we're just like scratching our heads, speaking a language that isn't ours, claiming something that started with, captivity. It's just like, it goes back further,
Yeah, I always say that that's pretty much everybody, right? Everyone, depending on where you're from, whether you're from somewhere in the land of Ham,
you're from Europe, you're from the United Kingdom, you're from South America, Australia, right? Everybody has a sense of pride of their quote unquote homeland or what they believe their homeland is. Even for, you go into the Ishmaelites and like they have their own pride of, whatever region they're from. When you get into Israel, we have that same thing, right? Where you have the tribes, whether you're Simeon, whether you Asher, whatever, Levi, you still have that connection to your actual, quote unquote temporal homeland where you are now, the Caribbean. The only one who I always bring out is different is Judah, and that's the head tribe. Judah does not have that connection back to the land of Ham and saying, yeah, so far as for us, that's, grown up in, right? They don't have that connection of what we're taught. Mm-hmm. The other tribes do, not Judah. Mm-hmm. So the head of Judah now has to set the tone of saying, that's why the Lord raised up the tents of Judah first. Mm-hmm. To now set the tone of saying, okay, we're not going to highlight and focus so much on, the lands of our pilgrimage right now. We are now going to look to Israel and then bring up all these things that Mattathias is about to go into, and then now bring that back to us because that relates to all of us, right? Joshua, right? He's from your tribe, right? And he's one of these that you can go further back to. What you just look down into the aisles over there. This is one of those revered men of the Most High that we can now say that's one of ours. And you can do the same thing for your tribe. You can do the same thing for your tribe. So this is us coming back to the realization of how the Lord really separated us. Me and you like the scripture when it says, this and that man was born in her. Mm-hmm. Sure, I can speak about these other guys, but this and that man was born in her. And this distinction should let you see that you are those people.
Okay. You gotta be thinking about other brothers who go unnamed, right? That teach, they gotta be Israel. Look what they did. Look at what they accomplished. Gotta be Israel. And it's just like, not necessarily, but the strangers, the strangers, let them have their day or two in the sun. We got the whole year, we got the whole sun, not just a day, Right. Come. But yeah, Tawab. So let's go back to Maccabees and let's see these other great men, famous men that Mattathias is going to mention. It says in 54, we already read the scripture on him. Phinehas, our father, right? So he's acknowledging their lineage, right? Going back to Phinehas, since they came from that same lineage through Jorib. Phinehas, our father, in being zealous and fervent, obtained the covenant of an everlasting priesthood. Then, you just mentioned him, Jesus, which this Jesus is Joshua. Same name, just a different spelling. Jesus, for fulfilling the word, was made a judge in Israel, right? Arguably, you could say the first judge, sort of, because he kind of began the period of the judges after Moses, right? Then it says, Caleb, for bearing witness before the congregation, received the heritage of the land, right? Him and Joshua alone, that whole generation. Everyone else was just, they had to go because they were stuck in their old Egyptian ways. It's like we're stuck in our American ways now, our British ways now, our Caribbean ways now, our Central South American ways now. Like you said, thinking this is it, thinking this is our culture. And it's like, nah, it goes back further. You can see Judah making attempts to, root themselves, but not in Africa because they're realizing they didn't realize already. And these Hamites, aren't about our, let us say they're not our people. They'll still say they're their people, but it's like you see this distrust now that they have towards Ham, which us that know the truth, we kind of laugh. We go, oh, okay, so now you're ADOS, now you're FBA, now you're these other things. Now we just laugh because we got the 12 tribe sign. Like we done been told you right here, Black American descendants of slaves. We already got your real name, so whenever you're ready to acknowledge that you're Judah, we'll be here. We already got the code. They're talking about, we got to get on code, and there's merit to things that they're talking about as far as working with each other and not just trusting anybody and dealing with Esau, according to principles, not just out of emotion, just out of anger. That's all well and good, but it's just a step closer to getting to what your true nationality, which is tribe of Judah or the 12 tribes of Israel. You want to get on code? Great. We got the code right here. And like we were talking about earlier, Khan, right? This is people say this is a solely religious book, but we can also say this is a law book too, a legal book, right? A legal document, right? We can refer to this that way too. Let's get on this code. But anyway, it says Caleb, 57. David, for being merciful, possessed the throne of an everlasting kingdom, right? And we see his story all throughout the Samuels, right? Where I referenced earlier, him having being at odds with Saul, him being next king in line, Saul's favor declining. The Most High delivered Saul into his hands on many occasions, but even he still showed him mercy, even though the men that were with David were like, "Oh, we got Saul, right? We got the upper hand. Let's take him out." And then David would always rebuke his own men and say, "No, we're not going to kill him. He's the Lord's anointed," right? Because David's hope was that maybe Saul might repent, right, from trying to kill him wrongfully. So he was showing mercy, even the heathen that took his life, even against his own will. When he brought the message to David, David had him killed right on the spot, just for doing that, right? He said, "You killed the Lord's anointed. Fall on this guy." Most of us, if we had that same situation with one of our brothers, we'd be ready to off him right then and there, right? With that evil eye. And hell with that so-and-so. Yeah, I'm going to do it with my own hands. I'm going to get revenge on my brother, right? So David's story is very important to understand that importance of showing mercy. And when David made his error, he was found, mercy was found for him. So you get what you put out, you get what you receive. So excellent lesson there too, among others. And we also we read a verse for him earlier too. In verse 58, Elias, who's Elijah, right? One of the greatest prophets, right? One of the MVPs as far as righteous people go of our nation. It says Elias, for being zealous and fervent for the law, was taken up into heaven, right? He didn't die a natural death. Like I said before, very rare, right? Greatest honor, greatest way to die. Only thing that comes close is to die a martyr's death. And the Most High has that for you, is to be translated, right? As a testimony of how you lived in the earth and how the Most High considered you. So he was one of those few that was translated. You read about that in the 2 Kings 2nd chapter, right? Then it says in verse 59, Ananias, Azarias, and Mishael, by believing, were saved out of the flame, right? We may be more familiar with their slave names, their Babylonian names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but these were their Hebrew given names, right? Ananias, Azarias, and Mishael. It says, by believing, were saved out of the flames. They were thrown in that fiery furnace, because you go back in Daniel. We just read this too in the Apocrypha, right? We read the song of the three holy children. They built this wicked idol in Babylon, and we have everybody worship it. And yeah, they worked in the government. Yeah, they dealt with the Babylonian laws. They understood the law, but they knew to draw the line when it came to anytime the Babylonians were pushing people to do something against the Most High's law. So they're an example for us too, to say, all right, we follow the laws of the land. Yeah, we're in captivity. Okay, we acknowledge it due to our sin. But anytime the powers that be would say, you must, and it's something against the law, we draw the line. They may throw the book at us, do even worse, right? Take our jobs, take our contracts, whatever it is. They try to hurt, try to harm us or hurt us, try to afflict us. But when we stand our ground, the Most High will find a way and protect us. And we had their testimony to be reminded of that. And not only those three, but also their friend who? Daniel, verse 60. Daniel, for his innocency, was delivered from the mouth of lions, him put in a similar predicament, right? No one can pray but the king. Daniel's like, what are you talking about? We can always pray to the Most High. We're supposed to. He kept his prayer, his steady prayer of morning, noon, and evening. When you read in Daniel, the 6th chapter, he kept that going, right? And for that, they passed that law just to get at him because they were jealous. They said, we got him praying. We said only the king can pray. Throw him in the lions then. Most High sent the angel down for Daniel's sake to stop the mouths of lions, right? So that Daniel was in there that whole time, didn't have to worry about being devoured of the lions. And when the king saw it, was amazed, and then praised our God, the true living God, for a moment, went back to his idols afterwards, unfortunately. But then through the men that accused Daniel, in that same den, it says the lions jumped on them quick fast. Just to show the Most High's power, right? When it comes to his anointed, he can easily put that hedge about him, no matter what the danger, whether it's dangerous men, dangerous animals, dangerous storms, nature, right? Fire. Most High can cause that thing to just what? Be pushed away to protect his. Verse 61, and thus consider ye throughout all ages that none that put their trust in him shall be overcome, right? So I just named you a couple MVPs, but think about all the others, right, that I haven't mentioned that the Most High looked out for because they put him first. It says in verse 62, fear not then the words of a sinful man, for his glory shall be dung and worms, right? So these Greeks that are up against us now, they'll be just like those men that came before that did the same, right? And this shall be their reward. Today he shall be lifted up, and tomorrow he shall not be found, because he is returned unto his dust, and his thought is come to nothing, right? So now you see me, now you don't. Yeah, they might be or might have a name now in their respective kingdoms. Like you mentioned earlier, Khan, right? I'll make mention of Rahab and these people, right? And Tyre and Philistia, that they have this person, right? Yeah, they're going to have their notable ones, but they're not making me their number one. They're just going to be another relic in history. Whereas with you, if you follow me, yeah, they're going to ridicule you. They're going to come against you because they come against me. But if you stay in your course to the very end, I'll make sure you have an everlasting name. And we see he's done that because we're reading about these same people right now, which in their time when they were alive and going through that affliction, you could see our people in the heathen looking, going, oh, Daniel, man, look at this guy. How could he throw it away? He had one of the best jobs in Babylon. Look at him now. Man, it's over for this guy. Look at him. He's in a lion's den. He's finished because they couldn't see what the Most High could see. Oh man, David, look at this guy. He's on the run, running, hiding in caves. This guy, he's finished. Right? That's people living at that time looking at him would see. Or the disciples, right? Look at Peter. Look at this guy. Fisherman running around, right? Claiming to be, the follower of this guy, Christ, the son of a carpenter. Ooh, these guys. These guys aren't Pharisees, Sadducees. They're not anyone that's supposed to be noteworthy. But yet, we remember them even more than those same Pharisees and Sadducees. Right? The thing that they feared happened anyway, getting outshined by the Son of God and those that follow him, because they sought that glory for, their why was wrong, right? But the disciples' why was on point, and they're willing to face the ridicule of the world, right? To get that favor with the Father. So Mattathias is on that same vein. He's on that same vibration. It says in 64, wherefore you, my sons, be valiant and show yourselves men in behalf of the law, for by it shall ye obtain glory. So this is how you get glory, through the Most High's law. And behold, I know that your brother, so now he's going to go into his sons, right? Because he knows his sons and knows his sons' strengths, right? As they grow up, he acknowledges his sons and knows that, just like if you have any group of kids, right? Even if you're a parent with kids, or if you're a teacher with students, you'll take note of the children before you and look at what they do well, what they excel in, right? What's their strong suits, and try to bring that out of them even more. You leave the door from the trial of things, but whatever they like to do and do well, you give them more of that, right? They can become really good at that. So that's going to build their self-esteem up and other things that'll motivate them. It says, behold, I know that your brother Simon is a man of counsel. Give here unto him always, he shall be a father unto you, right? And we see that father, right? And we see, Christ had to clean it up later on because that thing got out of hand, unfortunately. But back then, it wasn't a bad thing. At least at that time, it was like when they said father, it just meant like a leader. So you look up to your father in the household, right? You're supposed to be the head of the family, right? So that's what they mean when they say he should be a father unto you. But, Christ, he had to, because people started to, worship the creature more than the creator too much with the whole father thing. So he said, look, call no man father, but your father which is in heaven, right? He even had to do that with himself at times, right? When they tried to give him all this credit, right, for certain things. He always pointed back to the Father being the ultimate head, the ultimate leader. Said you didn't make too much of a man as flesh. It says in verse 66, and as for Judas Maccabees, he had been mighty and strong, even from his youth up. Let him be your captain and fight the battle of the people. So I got my one son, Simon, who's good when it comes to counsel, when it comes to discernment, right? Small matters, great matters. I got my other son, Judas Maccabees. He's good when it comes to tactics, battle tactics, combat, right? That's his strong suit. So have him do this, right? Combine your forces, right? Don't try to, there's no competition, right? Combine your strengths so that what? You can do the best for the nation. Verse 67, take also unto you all those that observe the law and avenge ye the wrong of your people, right? Which they've already begun to do already at this point. But he's saying, keep that going. Take also unto you all those that are right there, recompense or pay back fully the heathen, and take heed to the commandment of the law. All right, that's it. He says in verse 69, so he blessed them and was gathered unto his fathers, right? So now Mattathias is old and he now dies. But he got to say his parting words to his sons as far as, their marching orders, right? As he gets ready to go back to the Father. And really, we could say, go to sleep. Because he died, but he's not really dead. He lives on. And we want to see that as you read on in the Maccabees through his sons as far as his example. It says in verse 70, and he died in 140th and 6th year, and his sons buried him in the sepulchre of his fathers at Moda. And all Israel made great lamentation for him, right? So this is the way you want to go out, right? As an older person, older man, older woman, right? You want to keep your reputation, your righteousness. You want to keep your consistency intact as being for the Most High, only for the Most High, right? Even in your old age, right? There's nothing worse than, you've been doing this for a large portion of your adult life. Maybe even as a child, you might have learned this. Then you get older up in years, and then you start to backslide. Now it's like, oh, you know what? Maybe Christ did come for everybody. Maybe this is Jesus. And you get into the Catholic Church or other stuff. That's something we've seen, right? With brothers that have come into the truth, right? In the 70s, 80s, 90s, right? 2000s that we might have looked up to, studied, right? Not even studied with directly. We might have old footage of them, right? Old VHS tapes. We're like, man, this brother's on point. And you see him now, and it's just like, oh man, many are called, few were chosen. Wow, how could they totally do a total? How could they do a total 180? But it can happen like that. But our hope is that what we wax old and we have a hoary head, but that hoary head be had in righteousness. Let me get that verse real quick. Since we see Mattathias, he fits the bill for this. To link with this last little section here. Oops. Let's reply back to this. I'll read two. First, I'll get the law about it, and then I'll get the proverb about it. First, go to Leviticus 19. Okay. Taking good time. Leviticus chapter 19. In verse 32, which reads, thou shalt rise before the hoary head and honor the face of the old man and fear thy God. I am Yahweh. So the hoary head means just the gray head. So when an elder enters an area or a room or what have you, you're supposed to rise up and you stand up. We see that tradition kept by our ancestors, right? You can kind of see it mentioned or alluded to even in the time of Genesis with Laban and his daughters, right? When he entered in the tent. But you see this custom even embraced by the other nations too, right? Especially like in a military setting, like like I know Kansamak, I know you're familiar with this as far as like how anytime like a commanding officer comes into a room, right? All the other soldiers are seeing, they kind of stand up and salute, and he'll tell them at ease. Or when a judge enters a courtroom, right? Everyone all rise, right? That's where that comes from. There's probably others I'm missing, but those are kind of major ones we're probably familiar with, right? We see someone that has a certain stature or considered, a person of authority. People stand up when they come in. So we had that in the law, right? For the elder man. And I'm about to read the proverb now because, it comes with a condition. Because what we got now, unfortunately, is you got the elders of our people who are foolish like the elders in the wilderness, right? A lot of them. They just think just because they're up in years, they should, command that respect. Yeah, ideally it should be that way, but it's not always that way because I'm about to read it now. Proverbs chapter 16 and verse 31. Proverbs 16 and 31, it says, the hoary head is a crown of glory, but here's the catch. If it be found in the way of righteousness. See that? So it's almost a shame for you to have a hoary head, right? As a man or a woman. And then, the young, the middle age and the young are coming to you for questions or for counsel. And then you just like, your answers are just like, what? What does that mean? How's that going to work? Or this doesn't make sense. And the younger, the people that are younger than you lose trust in you now. That's a shameful thing. You should be one to have answers for things because you've been on earth for some time and hopefully you've learned the lessons that life is supposed to teach us. But sadly, what you have is, the reverse. Sometimes you have the youth who are wise beyond their years. As they say, that's an old soul. I can't believe so-and-so. She's only 14 years old. Wow, she's like an old soul. You got folks that are like 75, 80 years old, running around the streets, like some wild kids. You're like, what is this? You might be 80 years old. You're out here running around like a fool with no self-control. Like, it's a shameful thing just to see that. But that's what you had. You have the reverse.
And to the hoary head, to your point, most people feel that, age, is what determines that hoary head, right? It's just, I've lived 40 years, 50 years. I've seen, I've seen so much. So, I've, accrued that honor bestowed upon me that I can now, show you certain things. But to that verse, righteousness has to be found in, which comes back to the law, which comes back to your execution of doing things in the law, right? So this is Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 4, and verse 8. Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 4, and verse 8. It says, for honorable age is not that which standeth in length of time, nor that is measured by number of years, right? So yeah, you could be, an older, as they say, elder statesman, but to have honor that goes along with your age, that's not the prerequisite, right? It says, I'm reading again, for honorable age is not that which standeth in length of time, nor that is measured by number of years. But wisdom is the gray hair unto men, and an unspotted life is old age. So if you now are living a righteous lifestyle, right, and you can be found sinless in society, where no one can come to you for any accusation, you don't have a bad reputation out there, then that is what now gives you an honorable age, right, that the Lord can look at and be well accepted. Not just because you was, you a drug dealer, then you became owned a business, and you said, okay, I'm not being a drug dealer no more. Now I own laundromats, right? And I teach the youth about making money, right? And like, yo, that brother right there, see, he's an honorable man. But that's not the Most High's view of an honorable man. Just because he owns a business, his principles that he's teaching, does it align with the principles of the Most High, right? Is he acknowledging the ceremonial days that the Lord wants us to do? Is he keeping the moral code? Does he know who his people are, and he separates those who are outside? And does he understand the dietary law? Like a lot of those things now gives wisdom. And when you are able to do it out in society, that is where you can get that just do and say, you know what? I'm going to stand for this brother. This brother lived 40 years doing this. Rise, yeah, this brother is, you know, because to do that in this world ain't an easy thing. So he commands that. So you're right. When you go into, you know, military settings for general officers, or like you said, people who are your commanding officer, everyone's supposed to stand up. And it's, sit down. Like, you know, it's like, come on.
Mm.
Judges do it, you know, command, all right, sit down. No. Stay where you are. I don't know. But it's just supposed to be a sign of respect and acknowledgement of you being a forerunner to now pass that on.
Come. One more. Got to get Job. Elihu, son of Barachal, the Buzite. And he did the right thing, right? He's going to tell you, you know, what he did as far as, you know, hearing them out. And you see how disappointed even he got, right? This is Job 32. Job 32. I'll start from 4. Actually, let me start from the top, just so we get the full story. I'll stop at 9. So Job 32 and verse 1, it says, so these 3 men ceased to answer Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. Let's read above. There's like a lot of call and response back and forth, trying to figure out the why behind what Job is going through, right? Try to make sense of it, right? If he's doing all the right things, how come all these horrible things happen to him, right? Basic story. It says in verse 2, then was kindled the wrath of Elihu, the son of Barachal, the Buzite, of the kindred of Ram, because against Job was his wrath kindled because he justified himself rather than God. Also against his 3 friends was his wrath kindled because they had found no answer and yet had condemned Job. Right? He's mad at both of them, right? For, you know, not having a sound response to even a dire situation like Job's, right? It says in verse 4, now Elihu had waited till Job had spoken because they were elder than he. When Elihu saw that there was no answer in the mouth of these 3 men, then his wrath was kindled. And Elihu, the son of Barachal, the Buzite, answered and said, I am young and you are very old. Wherefore I was afraid and durst not show you mine opinion. I said, days should speak, and multitude of years should teach wisdom. That's what you read in the Wisdom of Solomon, right? But there is a spirit in man, and the inspiration of the Almighty giveth them understanding. Then this is in verse 9, finally. Great men are not always wise, neither do the aged understand judgment. So verse 9 is the camp verse, right? But you know, 1 to 9 is the whole background. But if you can't, just pull the verse 9 to get to the point. Because sometimes you might be dealing with somebody and they're doing that, right? They're like, you better listen to me, you know, young whippersnapper, you know, you used to whip behind the ears, you know, you know how long I've been doing this, you know, I've been, you know, running my church for however many years, or I got this PhD, and then we come out there, you know, not with the same experience, not with the same age, bring out a verse here, bring out a verse there. And then to save face, the person is like, you know, says something that's off topic and tries to, you know, run away. It's just like, you know, why not just stay and be edified, right? But, you know, sometimes people get afraid. They feel like all the work they put in this world to get some kind of notoriety or experience, or they don't want it to all go to, you know, all to it to be a waste, you know, because we have that. Folks that are 60 plus at the camp or PhD plus at the camp, right? And, you know, they've had experience, yeah, and they've come to conclusions, but their conclusions aren't sound when it comes to their studies, their learning, their experience. And we pull 2 or 3 milk verses that pretty much, you know, just shut their whole world down, and they're heartbroken. And they understand what you're bringing out, but they got to find a way out just to save face. And it's just like, it's not about you. You know, it's this we're doing out here is something bigger. You know, we all experience this on one level or another, being humble from what we thought we knew to now being shown what we should know. You know, we ask that you be humble in the same regard. But it's hard for some folks. It's hard for them to really stomach that. They really feel like, dang, you mean to tell me 25, 30 years, 35, 40 years of my life is studying this or learning this is just a waste? Well, I'm going to use it in this world, right, to keep my notoriety. Because I don't want this truth you guys are talking to shut down all my hard work and effort. It's just like, don't think about it that way, because if you do, you'll have your reward. But yeah, that's the end. You can write this down. I'll just read a couple excerpts from here. But when you're reading, like I was reading before for the last chapter, book 12, chapter 6 of the Josephus is a chapter you want to read to do like a cross-reference with the history that's here. What we just read in First Maccabees chapter 2 corresponds with the Josephus, book 12, chapter 6. Like we said earlier in the beginning, nothing wrong with using history books as a reference. But remember that the Bible is the primary source. And sometimes other books will give you more insight into things you find in the scriptures. But always make sure anytime you quote anything from history, you align it with a prophecy. And if you can't, then just say allegedly. Or according to research, it is said that this is the details behind this. This is where this took place. This is why this happened. Right? And just leave it at that. You don't want to be saying something and then you say, oh, really? Well, what book says that? Because you're quoting like you're quoting the scriptures. Now you get jammed up. But yeah, it says in the first section here in book 12, chapter 6. Now at this time there was one whose name was Mattathias, who dwelt at Modin, the son of John, the son of Simeon, the son of Asmoneus, a priest of the order of Joarib, and a citizen of Jerusalem. So the same as we touched on through the scriptures. It says he had 5 sons: John, who was called Gaddis, Simon, who was called Matthias, Judas was called Maccabees, Eleazar, who was called Aron, or Avaron, same thing, and Jonathan, who was called Apis. Now the Mattathias lamented to his children the sad state of their affairs, and the ravage made in the city, and the plundering of the temple, and the calamities the multitude were murdered or under. And he told them that if it was better than to die for the laws of their country than to live so ingloriously as they did, referring to the other Jews. Then it says in the second section, and when those that were appointed by the king were come to Modin, that they might compel the Jews to do what they were commanded, and to enjoin those that were there to offer sacrifice, as the king commanded, they desired that Mattathias, a person of greatest character among them, both on other accounts and particularly on account of such a numerous and so deserving a family of children, would begin to sacrifice, because his fellow citizens would follow his example, and because such a procedure would make him honored by the king. But Mattathias said that he would not do it, and that if all the other nations would obey the commandments of Antiochus, either out of fear or to please him, yet would not he or his sons leave the religious worship of their country. But as soon as he had ended his speech, there came one of the Jews into the midst of them and sacrificed as Antiochus had commanded, at which Mattathias had great indignation and ran up upon him violently with his sons, whom had swords with them, and slew both the man himself that sacrificed, the Apelles, the king's general, who compelled them to sacrifice. That was the commissioner, right, that we read about in the scriptures. With a few of his soldiers, he also overthrew the idol altar and cried out, if, he said, anyone be zealous for the laws of his country and for the worship of God, let him follow me. And when he had said this, he made haste into the desert with his sons and left all his substance in the village. Many others did the same also and fled with their children and wives into the desert and dwelt in caves. When the king's generals heard this, they took all the forces they then had in the citadel of Jerusalem and pursued the Jews into the desert. And it goes into the details about them attacking them on the Sabbath day. But the thing that's so funny to me is I can go into this history book, right? And people will be all ears, right? They'll say, oh, Josephus, oh my goodness. Oh, okay, it says that. But he's going right to the primary source, right? He's quoting the same thing you see right here in the Bible. But it's so funny. If I come with this first, I'm not religious, brother. I'm not like we we're talking about earlier, kind of. I'm not religious, brother. I'm a scientist, and it's like, and I'm not. I don't, I don't do with, deductive reasoning because I'm quoting the Bible, right? Why is that? But if I read from this, and then the history in here, or other history books coincides with this, why not just go to this? Because why? There's a stigma around the Bible. And we know that our enemies has been, very, what do you call it? Very astute, trying to make people or change people's perception around this book, right? Except for those who, are actually scholars, actually archaeologists, actually do the digging. They always refer to the Bible as a primary source for different things. When you study the artifacts of other empires that were around during the times of the Bible. Well, for your regular person, then you bring up the Bible, they're just like, "Oh my God, why are you reading that? That book's been tampered with. That's man's book. Man wrote that." All other confusion that comes out.
Right. So when we look at the word, right, from John 1 and 3, we can use the Bible to justify anything in creation, but it doesn't go the other way because nothing created wasn't created outside of the Bible, outside of the Word.
Mm-hmm.
So anything in creation is not come, to fruition without the Word themselves. Yahweh. There's no getting away with it. Nothing, if somebody can come up with any book, any invention, it's the fact that the raw thing was already there from the beginning for you to put your hands on, based on Yahweh's word. I mean, based on the Most High's word spoken by Yahweh. So there's no way around it.
Come. Absolutely, positively. Okay. So we'll make an end here. But like I said, hopefully everybody was edified by today's lesson as we just got into Maccabees and got everything worked out with the visual aid. It seemed like everything checked out when we did the video earlier. Folks were able to hear it fine, so that's good.
It's like that scripture that said that might be justified in thy sin.
Yeah.
That might have overcome with thy judgment. When you speak according to the scripture, you're supposed to is above everything.
Right.
So when the word speaks, it justifies everything.
That's right. All right. So once again, we'll make an end here as we just get started as we get started into First Maccabees. Yeah, like I said, if you do read that history, just remember those references I made to. You go into the Josephus. It's book 12, chapters 5 and 6 do pretty much the first and second chapter of First Maccabees, as far as the historical references. But for next week, since we did the Apocrypha this week, we're going back to Samuel. And since last time we did 11 and 12, the first Samuel, 10 and 11 last time, we're going to be doing 12 and 13 for next Sabbath. So next week, once again, First Samuel, chapter 12 and 13. And then we'll do the New Testament again, then the Apocrypha again, Old Testament, New Testament, Apocrypha on that pattern. All right. So we'll say Ashar Shabbat Wa Chadash, since we know it's the Sabbath and it's the new moon. So remember, keep it a holy Sabbath, but at the same time, you can cook since it's a feast day as well. So enjoy the rest of the day. Hopefully it's a fruitful, eventful one. We'll continue to enjoy the feast here, continue to do the Most High's work. I'm sure the weather is like where you guys are at, but I know it's sunny down here, so hope we can go out and edify some folks too, if the Lord wills it. And that, we'll do the closing prayers. So once again, Ashar Shabbat Wa Chadash. Barakatah Yahweh by Shemi Hawashai, Asherah, Nathananaw, Paria Gapin, Thuara Aman. La Yahweh by Shemi Hawashai, Av, Yasher Allah. I Magwa, Panway Jerusalem, stand and face Jerusalem. Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahushai, Babakushai, Shemai, Lanawa, Aithad, Yemyen, Aithad, Shalak, Micah Allah, Wala Allahayim, Tazwadakim, La, Shamar Isle, Barak, Rapah, Magun, Wachaziyak, Banya, Yasha Allah, Washalak, Lanawa, Rabian, Kakama, Rabian, Da'aith, Rabian, Bayanah, Rabian, Sabalanwa, Rabian, Amawan, Rabian, Aqua, Rabian, Ahabian, Rabian, Haganah, Rochanaya, Wasalak, Kal, Katayanawa, La Akin, Wa Akiwa, Wayashala, Thamyad, Waiwalam, Ba'asham, Yahawashah, Thawada, Aman. English translation, Yahweh, in the name of Yahweh Shai, please listen to us now. Right now, send Mike on the righteous powers to watch over, bless, heal, protect, and make strong the children of Israel. And send to us much wisdom, much knowledge, much understanding, much patience, much faith, much brotherhood, much love, much spiritual protection, and forgive all our sins. For the brothers, sisters in Israel, always and forever, in the name of Yahweh Shai, thank you, so be it. The Four Corners Prayer. Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai, Barak Nawa, Wayasha Allah, Wabath Yasaparim, Shema, Yasher Allah, Yahweh, Allah, Yahweh, Yahweh, Ached. English translation, Yahweh, in the name of Yahweh Shai, bless us in Israel in the house of books. Then we said, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. So once again, we say Ashar, Shabbat, Wa Chadash. And we also say Barakatah Yahweh by Hashem Yahushai, La Haruch HaKadosh. Without them, none of this could be possible. May the 12 tribes of Israel wake up in due time, on the Most High's time. Enjoy the rest of the day, Israel. Shalom.
Shalom.